And this is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Left 127. We have a couple of guests tonight, and you can bet, of course, that tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern, last hour of the show, we're going to talk about the NSA and their spying on Americans. Now, it's not just a few Americans, it's just about everybody. So we're looking for your calls during the last hour. I'm just going to lay out what the facts of it are, and maybe we'll go over what the Fourth Amendment says, since most people seem to have forgotten it, especially our constitutional lawyer president. So we're going to do that at 7. This hour, we're going to talk to somebody about non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and bringing democracy to various parts of the world. Is it possible? Why is it being done in the first place? What are the reasons for it? How is it being done? Is it successful? At 6 o'clock, we're going to talk to an attorney who's the leading attorney in the country who represents people who have been affected by GMOs and foodborne illnesses having to do with things like Monsanto's genetically modified seeds. So that's at 7 o'clock. And why don't we just start right in? My guest tonight is Julie Fisher, and it's a new book that she's got, Importing Democracy, the Role of NGOs in South Africa, Tajikistan, and Argentina. And hi.
Hi. How are you?
Okay. How are you?
I'm good.
Oh, that's good. Let me do a little biographical background on you, and then we'll. Okay. And Julie Fisher's first book was The Road from Rio: Sustainable Development and Non-Governmental Movement in the Third World. And the second book is Non-Governments: NGOs and Political Development of the Third World. And she worked as a consultant to many international development agencies, evaluating both micro-enterprise projects and partnerships between international and indigenous NGOs. And she taught comparative politics at Connecticut College and was an adjunct professor and scholar in residence at the program on nonprofit organizations at Yale. And she also spent 10 years as a program officer at the Kettering Foundation, which is a think tank on democracy in Dayton, Ohio. And they're the ones who published this book, which is Importing Democracy, the Role of NGOs in South Africa, Tajikistan, and Argentina. So when you say importing democracy, you're not saying exporting democracy.
Exactly.
So, okay,
exactly. That's the point.
Why don't you tell us the difference?
Well, I got frustrated before I wrote this book with sort of two rather sterile points of view, sometimes juxtaposed against each other. One was the idea that you can export democracy sort of as a template to another country from, because we know what it is, we're so perfect, we can give you our form of democracy. And that was something that was one of the raison d'etres of the Iraq and the Afghan wars originally. But there are also many other people in AID and the State Department who also had the idea, well, we didn't like doing it through military means, but you can do it peacefully. But the idea of exporting democracy has been widespread among the sort of power elite. And on the other hand, you have scholars and academics who sort of turn up their noses at this, but the way they do it is a little bit snide. It's sort of, well, these countries can't be democratic. Mm-hmm. And this book was intended to say you're both wrong.
Okay.
And it was intended to say people can create democracy in their own country in the way they want to. And therefore they can pick and choose democratic ideas or practices from other countries. And they can combine them with, in most countries, there are local democratic traditions which have been around for hundreds of years, such as village councils. Mm-hmm. And so, this is let me give you an example of an imported idea, which, again, we assume that we in the U.S. or Europe, know all about it. Well,
yeah, it grows here naturally, so we could export it all over the world. I mean, right. Actually, we could use a little importing of democracy right here, right now. But
exactly.
Okay.
Well, there's a really creative practice that was developed in Brazil called participatory municipal budgeting, and it's a way, I won't get into the details, but it's a way of engaging citizens in municipal budgets directly, getting their views on it, getting them to weigh in, getting them to really grapple with the numbers. And that practice had spread to many, many other countries in the world. So there's an example of a democratic practice being imported by other countries.
Imported from where?
From Brazil.
Okay,
that's where it was invented.
So in other words, it can migrate from there to using NGOs. It can migrate from there to other places where it might fit, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And, I think the book is really focused on what I call democratization NGOs. And even though each country's different, they have to pick and choose, they have to develop their own models, these organizations are remarkably similar, despite the fact that the three countries I looked at were incredibly different in other respects. And these organizations exist all over the world.
So
they're kind of a global trend that's been ignored.
Hmm. Can you describe the differences between NGOs? I mean, what is a democratization NGOs compared to another kind?
Yeah, okay. Well, NGOs as a whole are basically just nonprofit organizations. The term non-governmental organization is used in most of the world. We use the term nonprofit organization or voluntary organization, but it's the same thing. That's a very big category. So you have NGOs doing everything from public health to family planning to economic development to human rights. And human rights are part of what I call democratization NGOs. And there's a wide range. That's only a few of the types that exist. My whole career has been spent on indigenous NGOs. In other words, NGOs that work in their own countries. Although I've worked for a lot of international NGOs, such as Save the Children, CARE, who work in a number of other countries.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big category, and this is one particular part of it.
Would you say that here's two NGOs that just made the news the other day in the New York Times. You know what I'm talking about here. It's like Freedom House and the National Democratic Institute. Are they apparently in Egypt, they're not the flavor of the month.
Right. Well, let's make a distinction between the two of them. The National Democratic Institute gets a lot of U.S. government money, and Freedom House may get some. I'm not really familiar with their funding, but I think they may get some contracts. But they are a more autonomous NGO. Both of them are. I'm not even sure I would call NDI an NGO. Definitely Freedom House is, and I would classify it as an international NGO. And they do something valuable. They report on things like human rights violations, in different countries around the world, et cetera.
Is Amnesty International?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So would you say that to the extent that an NGO gets government money from any government, they are less of a free agent, less pure in a way?
Yes and no. I mean, if you want to make a really big generalization, yes. On the other hand, many NGOs are very clever at getting money from many sources. And if you're not dependent on government money, it's a little different than if you get 90% of your money from the government.
Mm-hmm. Apparently, there are some governments who react very badly to this. I mean, you see, the worst examples are always the ones that make the news. Of course, that's what the news is. So in Egypt, for instance, this is just Wednesday. The government had a couple of these places arrested.
Right.
And then, for instance, you have things like in Pakistan where, a health NGO where people are murdered for trying to vaccinate people.
And that's not even a political NGO like I'm studying. Those are you'd think, the least controversial.
Well, the problem in that case was that the CIA actually did, in fact, unfortunately, in one instance, use this group as a shield group to put its own agents in. So after
that's very interesting. I didn't know about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a problem. So, as far as you picked these three countries, South Africa, Tajikistan, and Argentina. South Africa, a lot of people take for granted in general that it's democracy, absolutely out and out democracy. Tajikistan, it's the other way around. Right, and then there's Argentina. So maybe you could explain why these three countries.
Okay, well, two of the countries, South Africa and Argentina, I call struggling democracies. They're not sort of. It's a fairly new thing for them, particularly Argentina, which had one of the worst military dictatorships in history in the late 70s and early 80s. Tajikistan, on the other hand, was part of the Soviet Union. And in the book, I say that Tajikistan inherited one good thing and one bad thing from the Soviet Union. The good thing it inherited is that women were educated. And so that about more than half of the NGO leaders that I interviewed were women. And that wasn't true in either South Africa or Argentina. It was interesting. The bad thing, of course, was the authoritarian political system, which is not only authoritarian in Tajikistan, it's highly corrupt. They say that 2 out of 3 units of currency entering the Tajik government stay in the pockets of the officials. So you can tell what one of the big causes of democratization NGOs in Tajikistan is to battle corruption, but they have a very hard time. I can't say that they've had much success, whereas there is also corruption in Argentina, and they've had more success there.
It's confusing sometimes, and if I keep going back to this default idea of America and its involvement, I think that's one thing you do address in the book, though. How it affects America's foreign policy and what our foreign policy is. So it's a legitimate question to ask. For instance, in Tajikistan, the United States wanted to use, and I think perhaps still does use it as a sort of a transfer base for troops in Afghanistan.
Yes.
And then in Afghanistan, we find out recently that, just to pick another country in that area, that the United States was dropping off billions of dollars in cash, to the car. In other words, if we're supposed to be, on one hand, our leaders say we're exporting democracy, or we decry the anti-democratic governments, but we're still bribing them to do what we want. I mean, it seems
the right hand and the left hand.
Yeah.
And, in my last chapter, I actually lay out a 12-step program for international actors.
Good.
And the underlying recommendation, I'm not going to go into all the steps I recommend, but I hope people who are listening will buy the book, which you can get on www.importingdemocracy.org
and
or
Amazon.
On Amazon.
Okay, Importing Democracy, the Role of NGOs in South Africa, Tajikistan, and Argentina. And Julie Fisher, it's Fisher.
Fisher, yes. And anyway, the underlying recommendation in these 12 steps is that international actors of all kinds, and I'm talking international NGOs, governments, multilateral organizations like the United Nations, etc., they generally don't do their homework when they're working in a particular country. They tend to, hook up with the first person they meet at a cocktail party. Mm-hmm. And not necessarily which, for example, NGO is doing the best job. And this applies not only to democratization NGOs, but to many other kinds of NGOs. So, that is my sort of underlying recommendation. And I do have some more specific recommendations for foreign policy, and those are more difficult, of course. I'm not under any illusion that...
So we're having this conversation, and we're taking it for granted that democracy is the best form of popular involvement in government, right? We just take this for granted, although in a lot of other countries, this goes back a little bit towards what you say. Some people say, these places, they don't have it in them, you know what I mean? But so we take it for granted that that's the best form of government, and I'd be willing to say it probably is, right? But exporting democracy, or in other words, transplanting democratic movements or structures from one culture or one country to another, isn't that a kind of like missionary policy? Yes. It reminds me of the missionaries.
That was my motive for writing the book. I really thought we needed to, you can disaggregate that from the really huge advantages that democracy provides when people create it for themselves. I mean, there's all kinds of evidence that it makes catastrophes less likely. No democracy with a free press has ever experienced a major famine. Amartya Sen has done research on that. Between 1980 and 2001, the coefficient, this is a little too technical, but...
Well, translate it then.
Economic growth is higher in democracies. Life expectancies averaged 8 to 12 years longer during this period in democracies. Secondary school attendance doubled in democracies. Now, again, you don't know which is the cause and which is the effect here necessarily, and here, I think this is the most important. Democracies rarely, if ever, go to war with each other.
And so
they are less likely than autocracies to engage in war with autocracies. But that doesn't mean they don't. We did, right. We engaged in a war with an autocracy in Iraq. But
I'm not sure what Iraq was, but I mean, I guess you could approach it.
I think Saddam Hussein was an autocrat.
Well, that's true, but I'm not sure what we were doing. I mean, that he was an autocrat, absolutely.
Yeah. And all it is sort of looking at when democracies get into wars, and they don't tend to get in wars with each other.
So these things that you mention here, obviously, all these things are to be wished for and to be hoped for in any cultural location, any society.
Yeah.
What is that they all have in common? That these coefficients of these things are higher in these places. What is it that democracy brings to people that enables all these other things to be so high up?
It's a really good question, and I'm not sure that we know the answer to it. But I would say it enables people to become political actors. And when people become citizens or political actors, it is very difficult for arbitrary policies to be sort of foisted, which may not make any sense. Look at what's happening in Turkey right now.
Mm-hmm.
The government sort of arbitrarily said, well, we're going to put in this. They've been sort of destroying all the old buildings in Istanbul. I don't know if you've ever been to Istanbul.
I've been into Istanbul, and it's one of the most extraordinary, beautiful, wonderful places I've ever been, especially the old buildings.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the only buildings they're leaving standing in a lot of these renewal projects, so-called, are the mosques. And, you know, it's pretty depressing. And people in Taksim Square are just standing up and saying, they started saying, no, you can't do this. You don't have. We're citizens. You have to be accountable to us. And so, yes, it's about the square. It's about urban redevelopment gone haywire. It's about a place where public political talk has been possible for a long time. But it's also about the larger issues of governing in Turkey and what has happened since Erdogan came in.
Since I do know, my father worked in Istanbul as an engineer.
Oh, really?
And I visited him there several times, and I don't think I've ever been to a more interesting place in my life.
Oh, I loved it. My husband and I were there on our way to Tajikistan when I was doing my research for the book, and it was just extraordinary.
But even to imagine the fact that they've got all these new co-op, I mean, it's one thing, I live in Manhattan, where every 2 seconds they put up another, monstrosity, but over there, it makes me sick to think of it.
No, it does me too. I agree with you.
But enough for my my travel log. So you mentioned something here. This is very interesting to me. You say, first of all, Turkey. We're wandering a little bit, but we'll get back to those 3 countries.
Yeah.
Turkey. After all, with Ataturk started out, opposing the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
What was left of it established a kind of, I don't know what you would call it, secular military democracy. But still a democracy, and he obviously turned the faucet way down on religion. In fact, I was over there in the 70s when they were only beginning to reintroduce religion in public society, and even then it was Sufism. So here we have this thing. What happened in a democracy over there, which was going on for like 60, 70 or more years, where the military was, reduced in size, or rather in influence, not in size? So what happened over there?
Well, I would, for one thing, the military continued to be very, very powerful in Turkey, and I think too powerful. I mean, they were the enforcer of secularism. So if you like secularism, which I do, you can say, well, good, they enforce secularism, but were they really the right people to do that? That's one of the issues here. I mean, Turkey was a semi-democracy in a lot of ways, much better than many places in the Middle East, of course. I mean, no comparison. But the other thing that I think is really important to emphasize is that democracy, or let's not even say democracy, let's say democratization, is a long, hard slog. And it does provide people with hope, even if it's still country is still autocratic in some ways. It gives people the sense that they can begin to change things, that they can become active citizens. Whereas if you have a really hard autocracy, people don't like the difference between Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, for instance. And I'll just tell you a quick story. One of the man who coordinated my interviews there, who runs the umbrella organization of NGOs in Tajikistan, he told me that he had been visited the night before by the secret police, and they harassed him over a visit he had made to an old friend the night before. And he said, but he's my friend. I went to school with him. And they said, don't you know he's a dangerous man? And this went back and forth for about an hour. And he said, finally, they just shrugged their shoulders and left. He said, the difference is, in Uzbekistan, I would have been arrested. So even within autocracies, there are degrees.
So this is one of the reasons you select a place like this, is because it's a kind of a laboratory which is evolving, right?
Yeah, and I mean, one of the most remarkable accomplishments of democratization NGOs in Tajikistan is that as a group, they pushed through the parliament a law that outlawed sex trafficking to Dubai, which was a major problem. And they actually even got the government to enforce that statute, not as much as it could have been, but at least partially.
When you say they, who's they?
The group of NGOs.
Oh, really?
Yes.
But they can't do that independently of the electorate there.
But they got it through the parliament, so it became law, and then they publicized the fact that the government wasn't enforcing it, and they had friends in the press, and they got articles in the press about what a terrible thing, it was still going on, and these young girls were being kidnapped, and I mean, this was a major human rights issue in Tajikistan.
So is development of a free press an essential?
Absolutely.
It has to be, right? You know.
In fact, I define, it's not my definition, but I use a definition of civil society, which is markets, associations, and a sphere of public debate. So markets, and there's a long debate about whether to include them. We can just put that aside for the moment, but I'm thinking of everything from, micro enterprise to small businesses, et cetera. And associations would be NGOs. And the sphere of public debate is the press, but it's also forums that people hold in their own communities. One of the NGOs in Argentina, for example, that I studied, was working with a community which was along the Riachuelo, which is the biggest river around Buenos Aires. And these people lived with mountains of garbage because the garbage company wouldn't come in. And the illness was terrible. And so when they started these public deliberative forums among people, that people said, what's your number one problem? There wasn't any doubt, it was garbage. But they themselves decided the way to solve that problem, which was to hire local teenagers to pick up the garbage every day. And once they did that, then the province of Buenos Aires said, "Oh, well, we'll give you a little money for that. We'll pay the salaries of these boys or girls. I think there were some girls too." and then, of course, once you had that happen, then people said, "Oh, but there's all this backlog of garbage," and the garbage company and the city of Buenos Aires collaborated in getting rid of the backlog. And now, when I was there, it was they say it has among the cleanest streets of anywhere in Buenos Aires.
So it's not you couldn't just trust people on their own to form their own associations. The NGOs are a needed catalyst?
They are in many cases. I mean, there are rare examples of sort of things happening from below, but usually it's a combination of a smart NGO which doesn't try to tell people what to do, but just goes in and gets people to talk with each other. And public deliberation is a really good method. I think it would be great if we had more of it in this country. There is the National Issues Forum in this country, which is a partner with the Kettering Foundation where I used to work.
National Issues Forum? It's
National Issues Forum,
What is that exactly?
It's a national network of people who hold deliberative forums in their own communities, and the cardinal rule is no political issue ever has only two sides. It always has three or maybe four. And it changes the discussion, and I'll just give you one example from the U.S. if you're interested and we have time.
Sure.
Pueblo, Colorado had a very divisive debate, and by debate I mean two-sided debate, on the issue of sex education in the schools. And you can imagine the two sides of this debate. This was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And they got people together, the National Issues Forum did, and they said, okay, what's underneath this issue? If we dig down, what really bothers you about this? And they discovered that there was a common concern that bothered both sides, which was teenage pregnancy. And they renamed the issue as teenage pregnancy. Once you rename the issue, then everybody could talk. And they might disagree on what to do about it, but they all agree this is the problem. And then they started framing the issue in terms of three choices, possible approaches to this, and everybody was able to identify with at least one of those three choices.
Well, in a lot of countries, maybe even some of the ones you mentioned here, or initially when they first started this, it's a dangerous business to be in a democratization NGO, right? I mean, you're risking your life in some cases.
In Tajikistan, certainly it is. I wouldn't say it is in the other two. It's nor is it even as dangerous. I mean, obviously in Egypt and also in Russia recently.
Oh yeah,
it is dangerous to be doing this kind of work, no question. And I think one of the dilemmas with this foreign money you talked earlier about government money for NGOs, but foreign money is a huge problem as well. And I think
what exactly do you mean by foreign money?
Well, for example, NDI provides money to democratization.
NDI,
National Democratic Institute, which is a sort of semi-autonomous government, U.S. government.
And they were working in Egypt.
And USAID provides money, and it's not that all the things they do are bad. It's that it sort of taints them politically. It makes people like Putin and Morsi more able to point the finger and say, "Oh, you see, they're getting U.S. money." And I think that a really big challenge in the future, which no one is even really talking about, is how can the philanthropic sectors of these countries begin to develop? And because most countries in the world, even countries that have vibrant civil societies with NGOs, do not have vibrant philanthropic sectors. Venezuela is one of the very few I can think of that does. So in the long run, that's going to have to change, or else this dilemma of getting foreign support is going to continue to bedevil these organizations.
Well, not to get into a whole Marxian debate here, but I mean philanthropic cultures of philanthropic groups implies that there has to be an upper class that's very rich, right?
Not necessarily. There are a lot of very interesting models for community philanthropy, for small donations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not an expert in this field, but one of the international NGOs that works on this is called Synergos, and some of your listeners might want to go online and read more about them, because I think they've done some very creative things where they've worked, but it's a real challenge.
As far as South Africa goes, people who lightly know history, and I suppose that includes me in this particular case, assume that, oh, well, there was this terrible struggle, and then there was a democracy, and there is a democracy. Maybe you could talk a little bit more specifically about what the role of NGOs was there, or still is there.
Still is. Well, I think, the legal system in South Africa is probably the most advanced of the three countries I looked at, because what happened was that you had what I call a miniature legal system under apartheid. In other words, if you had white skin, the legal system treated you very fairly and very equally. And so it was a lot easier to expand that to include everybody after 1994 than it is, for example, in Argentina, to reform a legal system that always included everybody, but that was corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are some differences like that. South Africa has a huge advantage in terms of the legal system. It's also, got fair elections, as does Argentina, basically. But South Africa is burdened by this terrible socioeconomic inequality. It's one of the worst in the world. And as long as that goes on, democracy is in peril there. I will just say that. It is a terrible situation.
Well, since you mentioned that, then we have to come straight back here, almost like, what are those like a yo-yo, is it? You could spin it all the way out, but it comes spinning right back to you,
Yeah.
When we talk about these things, it comes snapping back to the United States. I mean, income inequality is the biggest problem we have right now, and it's almost like the root of all our evils, and it's anti-democratic.
And it's gotten worse.
Much worse.
That's the scary thing. I don't know if you know this book, The Unwinding, by Packer. It's a marvelous book, if I can put in a plug for another author.
Sure.
No, it's a brilliant book about the U.S., which does show there's some stuff going on in people's individual lives and local communities that's more positive. I think that's where you have to look for change in this country, because it's more and more obvious that, what happens at the top is not.
Oh, yeah, sure. It's
not going anywhere right now.
I mean, democracy itself is not trickling down anymore.
No,
so,
and we have the Citizens United decision, which is just...
Well, I've had guests on here, and there was one particular one, I don't remember his name now, who wrote this wonderful book, which includes articles by all sorts of people, and it's about the commons, the idea of the commons.
Yes.
And since you mentioned from the top down, this is where he sees it clearly. It can only work, democracy, to rebuild it, or to build it right again, or in other places perhaps, using the commons. In other words, cooperatives,
and from the bottom up. The bottom up.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's that example I told you about in Buenos Aires with the community. I mean, what's so interesting is that because they started that themselves, and that definitely grassroots with the help of the NGO, all these other bigger actors come in and want to do the right thing. The garbage company, the provincial government of Buenos Aires. And by the way, one of my major findings in all three countries is that these democratization NGOs have a much bigger impact at the provincial or local level than they do at the national level. So even, there's a judicial training course in that was developed in a province of Argentina, which has now spread out all over. It was developed by an NGO, and it was basically saying they got a bill through the provincial legislature saying, if you want to become a judge, you have to take this exam. My gosh, what a revolutionary concept, for Argentina. And the other example, which also is the judiciary, is that a national democratization NGO, here's a great national success, managed to get a bill passed by the parliament which required all Supreme Court nominees to go through open public hearings. That was totally revolutionary for Argentina. Before that, the president would send the name to the head of the parliament and he would sign it. And so it was full of cronyism and corruption and everything else. And when that law passed, 4 sitting Supreme Court justices resigned because they knew they couldn't stand the scrutiny.
So all of these things, it's interesting. All these things really do adhere to a certain pattern, which is it starts local and moves higher up or spreads.
It starts local, or it starts in some cases with sometimes umbrella or what's your best? A group of NGOs can do a lot at the national level if they work together. The campaign against the Mbeki policy on HIV/AIDS included democratization NGOs, but also health NGOs in South Africa. Mm-hmm. And that changed the policy. I mean, it was a horrendous policy. I'm sure you've read about that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess the thing that remains for me is when you were talking about Istanbul and you say they're putting up these buildings. It's an interesting use of the word "they" then, because I think of it. Sometimes it comes down to like you mentioned, language. In this country, that the original founders used this phrase "we the people."
Yes.
And then often when you talk about the government in this country and governments in every country, and I guess you're more familiar than I am in other countries, people always refer to they or them, right? As if they have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And, it's got to be we the people or it will never work. And this is all a setup to something you said before. You said they are putting up these buildings, these huge buildings, right, in the middle of Istanbul. Well, they are doing this everywhere. Who is they?
Yes, I mean it's the corporations, it's the people in the governments who are tied to the corporations. I mean that's true in Turkey and it's true here, isn't it?
Sure. So I mean, but then when NGOs have a sort of a natural, maybe enemy is a poor word to use since everybody's trying to get together here, but an NGO seems to me these days with globalization to have a natural, universal, adversary. There's a better word, an adversary, which is global corporations, which control governments, like in Nigeria with the oil companies,
Well, I think depending on the context, I would see more of them sort of, particularly the autonomous ones. I mean, carving out something they can do in spite of what's going on at the top. And that's because to take on those structures of power is, these are small, particularly in Tajikistan, these are small, underfunded groups of people. Mm-hmm. The people who run the NGOs in Tajikistan almost all have other jobs just because they can't raise enough money. I mean, they're working in their spare time. The head of the Tajik Association of Political Scientists, this is brilliant political scientist, Tajik political scientist, who has a regular full-time teaching job, but he's running this organization on the side, which is lobbying for, all kinds of positive change in the political system.
Let me ask you this question on a practical basis. Let's say, and involves a little sort of extending of yourself or fantasizing in a way, maybe. Yeah. Somebody says to you, Julie, here is $200 million. Oh, right?
My God.
Wait. Yeah, I know.
I don't need that much.
Okay, all right. So here's $50 million, right? Yeah. We have this little country called Bahrain, or, you know what I mean? We have this country, let's say, call it Bahrain, right? How would you just actually go about, as an NGO person, democratizing Bahrain?
Well, I'll tell you what, let me be a little critical of democratization NGOs here.
Okay.
I think one of their major flaws in all 3 countries that I studied is that they do not network strategically with each other. If you'll notice my cover, I think you got a copy of the book.
Yeah, it's a jigsaw puzzle.
It's a jigsaw puzzle, and the pieces of democratization have to be put together. But they don't always talk to each other about how. Or, oh, you're doing this, I'm doing that. That really would fit very nicely with what I'm doing. And so that's a huge, huge issue. And if I had money to do something, the first thing I would do would be to go back to those 3 countries that I know pretty well, and I would say, let's sit around and talk about this. Let's come up with some plans for networking more. Not networking for networking's sake. That doesn't work. It doesn't work with any voluntary organizations here or there. It becomes another layer, and it adds cost, and networking, a network that can be activated when needed, a network that involves a lot of communication, whether over the internet or face to face.
But still, as a practical example, I mean, let's take Saudi Arabia. How about Saudi Arabia?
I don't know Saudi Arabia well, so
whatever. It's got one thing in common with a lot of other places. There's virtually no democracy whatsoever,
and women are treated.
Okay, yeah, and that's part of what you talk about in your book too, which is the idea that if women are empowered in a place, then you're changing the entire culture, right?
That's what's happening in Tajikistan.
Okay.
Definitely.
So, but let's say you did have to go to a place which was, almost entirely autocratic. I mean, first of all, they wouldn't even let you in the country.
They wouldn't. Okay. I mean, we think we were followed by the secret police once in Tajikistan. But it was a sort of shrug of the shoulders situation, The woman that we were interviewing said, "Oh, yeah, they follow me all the time," kind of. Which is different than what you might get in other countries where you would really be putting your life on the line if you went. So,
well, I've interviewed people on the show. One woman who went into the Congo was talking to women about, advising women and counseling women about rape and about standing up for themselves in villages where men didn't do any work, women did all the work, that kind of thing. And it really worked. It helped. But again, it was very local. Yeah.
And I think that, in development or democratization, and I've worked in both fields, you need to look for a sort of a well-defined small thing that has side effects, positive side effects, or spin-offs, if you will. And so one of the most interesting things to me is how many spin-offs empowering women has. It's incredible. It has a spin-off on children. It has a spin-off on politics. It has a spin-off on health. It has a spin-off on family income very directly. I mean, you just go on and on and on. I won't even.
No, sure.
It's the sort of investment that, I mean, if I'm talking here in terms of, which you might say, what kind of investment would have the highest profit? You talk in business terms, investing in women. In terms of what really is going to change.
Well, it's helping here somewhat.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yes. Well, we had those hearings, didn't we?
Yeah, I guess so. Well, all right. So listen, the book is Importing Democracy, the Role of NGOs in South Africa, Tajikistan, and Argentina. And it's Julie Fisher. And why don't you give the website again?
Okay, my website is www.importingdemocracy.org, and you can order it through my website, or you can go on Amazon.com. It's very reasonably priced. It's paperback. I just noticed a book today online that was $117 on NGOs in China.
117 must be an academic book.
It is.
Yeah, I don't know. Those academic presses are bizarre.
Very. So this is about $18 or $20 depending on where you buy it.
What do you think, China? Are there any NGOs working in China?
Oh, yes. That's a whole other discussion.
Oh, yeah, I suppose it is. Since it's a corporate state, that's an interesting thing.
It is. It is. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. And good luck with the book. We'll be following what happens in all these countries. Right now, I think, considering everything that's going on, we need a lot more work at home before we go looking to the rest of the world.
Well, we might learn something from the rest of the world and import it into the United States.
Well, that Arab Spring thing seems to have jump-started the Occupy movement.
I think that's probably true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks again.
Good. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, this is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127. We're going to take a break right now. If you want to call up and talk about any of this, it's, once again, let me remind you, after 6 o'clock, we're going to talk to an attorney who is the leading attorney in the country who sues on behalf of people harmed by genetically modified organisms and foodborne illness. And he's gone after Monsanto many times and other companies like that. We're going to talk about the way Monsanto actually controls or seems to even own the Congress and the presidency. So we'll talk about that at 6. And then, of course, inevitably, we're going to talk about the NSA and spying after 7 o'clock. And if you want to call up about this issue or any other issue right now until the end of this hour, It's 866-997-4748. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back. So we're back. This is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127. As I have reminded you, almost to the point of being obnoxious, but of course I can never be completely obnoxious, but almost to the point of being obnoxious, I have a new book. I have a new book out, as I've been mentioning for the last couple of weeks. It's called A Long Swim Upstream. It's autobiographical stories, A Long Swim Upstream. And as you know, the NSA has been spying on everybody and has lists. They know, you know that old song, which came true finally when you learn when you're a kid here growing up, is Santa Claus is coming to town. He knows if you've been naughty or nice. Well, you know, it's the NSA that really knows that now. And Sirius also, this is something that I'm going to reveal here for the first time that nobody knows this. Sirius XM has its own spying unit here, which we can use anytime we want as broadcasters. And I have asked the intelligence unit of Sirius XM to find out who isn't buying my book. There are people in the audience I know have not bought the book. And I just have a partial list here. I'm not going to say last names because it's embarrassing, but Jim from St. Louis has not bought my book. Susan from Newark, I have it right here. Bob from New Mexico. We have someone named George from Crawford, Texas, and Barry from Washington. They have not bought my book. Buy the book. It's a good book. And if you want to find out more about it, go to my website. It's Fader Files. FEDERFILES.com. FEDERFILES.com. Now, we had this discussion earlier about the whole idea of democracy and how it works in other places. And you can see the pattern. You see what happens everywhere. This woman is an expert. She's traveled all over the world. She's done this kind of work in harsh conditions. She's worked for different kinds of agencies in the world to better people's lives. She's not a do-gooder. She's not a missionary who's got the saving, God that she's going to spread around, or the religion or the message all over the world. Her message is that people should be equal to each other and nobody should be oppressive. And if people have a government, local, state, provincial, or federal, any kind of government like that, it belongs to the people. And of course, it's very difficult for any American politician. I think they've almost given up now out of sheer shamefulness and embarrassment and guilt. Even the most stupid or insane politician, and we have more of them than we ever had before. We've got one guy from Texas, I think, and his name Louis Gohmert. You know Louis Gohmert from Texas? This guy, of all the people who've ever been in Congress who are really idiotic. I mean, remember Rick Perry, who couldn't count to 4 or 3 or whatever it was? This guy, Louis Gohmert, is the stupidest, most bigoted, the craziest guy's ever been there. For all these people now, there's hardly any of them anymore, including especially the president, who talk about exporting democracy. You remember that was a big thing with George Bush. We are sending our Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines over to these benighted places, these tribal, backward, autocratic places, and we're going to export American democracy. Well, American democracy is never what it was supposed to be in the first place. That's one, right? American democracy is basically capitalism. When he says export American democracy, he's talking about his dad's oil company or investment company, right? American democracy. So it's a kind of missionary thing. What did he call it? A crusade. A crusade. And there's about 500 homilies or old sayings that you take care of your own house first. Or, you don't go throwing stones if you live in a glass house. On and on and on and on. This arrogance, this astounding grandiosity and arrogance and contempt for other people that we could constantly say in this country, and people still do it. I mean, the leftover ones, the really idiotic, stupid, bigoted politicians who are still in any kind of national position, who assume, that we are better than any other country. Even compared to other democracies or industrialized countries, we are number 31 in education, number 42 in surviving infancy. I mean, our numbers get worse and worse and worse all the time. And it's exactly what this woman was saying before. If we don't empower people equally and give them a sense that they own their own government, whether it's local or it's a city or it's a state or a province somewhere in the world, if you don't have a sense of ownership, then you don't have a democracy. And so look at what's going on here. Now, how often do you refer to the government sometimes? You just call them the government. I mean, even those two words. You don't say our government. You don't say my government. You say the government. You say Washington. Look what's going on in Washington, you say, as if Washington was a separate country. And it is, isn't it? Now, was it always? I don't think it was. I've read a lot of American history, a whole lot of American history. It's one of my favorite subjects. And I've read, I suppose, 1,000 books on it by this point in my life, among all the other books I've read. Once upon a time, and this is partially, and it's a complicated thing, it's because the country's so big. I mean, once there was like 50 million people in this country, then there was 120 million. Now there's 320 million. Still in all, we're supposed to have a representative government. Does it really work anymore? Obviously not. When we refer to they are spying on us, this is what they want. They're raising my taxes. The government is acting this way. The government is acting that way. The president still gets up and says, because he has to, I guess, when he refers to things that are going on in the world, is we condemn oppressive, anti-democratic behavior in fill in the blank, China, Uzbekistan, whatever it is. We denounce that. But if you ask him at the same moment, I mean, he's standing up there. The other day he was in, California? And he has a little press conference, and he's there with, is it the premier of China? I forget, whatever title the guy has. And he's discussing with him how to prevent or to come to terms with these Chinese government-sponsored cyber attacks on American corporations and American government, and which is all bullshit anyhow, because, the Chinese are going to be smile and say, absolutely, you're right, we shouldn't do that, and they're going to keep doing it. But that's another story. So he's standing there with this guy who's the head of a corporate dictatorship, one of the largest in the world, a corporate dictatorship in China. And he stands up and he's talking about how we have to make sure that governments like in China, the United States is always denouncing China for its abuses of civil rights and political rights. Or name some other country, we're denouncing them all the time. But I don't think we have the right anymore. When I say we, see, there I go again. When I say we, it's left over from my childhood in the 50s and 60s when we felt like this was our country. When is the last time, I'll ask you, you're listening to me wherever you are, when is the last time you ever felt like you lived in a country that was your country? I don't mean because it's big or there's other parts of it or people act funny in different places or they have different accents, different regional accents or whatever, different religions. When did you ever feel like it was your country? I see people at all these sporting events. I watch a lot of sporting events. I watch hockey. I watch baseball. At the same moment that the president of the United States is saying that he's going to hound the person who leaked this document that let people know that what the government was doing in secret, at the same moment that he is standing up there and is responsible for destroying parts of our Constitution, which make it American in the first place, you've got people at a hockey game standing up at virtually the same moment with gigantic American flags. I guess there are people who are listening to me right now, and there are lots of people in this country that still feel like it's their country. It certainly doesn't feel like it's my country. I was taught in school what a democracy was supposed to be. I was told what America was supposed to be. I was brought up on stories of George Washington and the Revolutionary War and the Civil War and World War II, what we fought for, what they died for. Yeah, and we all understood that. There were guys in my neighborhood, all the parents, all the fathers in my neighborhood were guys from the Depression and combat veterans from World War II. And we looked up to them. Why? Because they fought for our freedoms, which we could practice. In the 60s, when we got out on the street, yeah, the FBI was investigating us. Yeah, the National Guard turned out. But still, it wasn't like a police state like it's approaching fast right now. It's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. And it's very sad when you think about the American government. I don't think of it as my government anymore. I think of it as the American government. I think of it as Washington. I think of it as them. And I know most of you do too. And you know why? Because it's true. People are down there. You know that the people in Congress, there's one law in this country which is rarely enforced, but when it is, it's a serious law. Violating insider trading to make money on the stock market or with corporations. There's only one small group in this entire country which is immune from prosecution on insider trading, if that's even possible to imagine. That's the Congress of the United States. They can make money, and they do. They make tens of millions. It includes Pelosi, Republicans, Democrats. They make all this money and they can't be prosecuted for using insider information. It's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. It's their country now. It's Washington. The only thing we can do is try to take it back from them. And voting for a Democrat or a Republican at the national level is not going to do it. Everything is going to have to come down to the local level. Absolutely everything is going to have to be broken down into pieces, and we're going to have to start building it from the bottom up. And I'm not talking about the Tea Party, which is funded by, the Koch brothers or whoever, who don't really know quite what they're doing and rail on about liberty and everything else. I think there's one billionaire on the left. That's George Soros. That's about it. So, what, you know more? So anyhow, we're about to go out for this hour. So that's it for the end of this hour. Come back after the 6 o'clock news, and we're going to talk about GMOs and Monsanto and how everything you're eating is making you sick. You need good news, right? Okay, we're back. This is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127. A lot of you have heard us talk about Monsanto here on this show before, and you've heard a lot of talk about it. Monsanto, when you think they couldn't go any further, they do. And fairly recently, there was a part of a bill. It was a spending bill, H.R. 933 in Congress. And part of it was called the Farmer Assurance Provision. I'm reading from something here. It's being blasted as the Monsanto Protection Act. And basically what it says is Section 735 of the resolution would seem to place the commercial concerns of Monsanto, the world's largest producer of genetically modified crops and seeds, above the authority of the judicial system. In effect, the provision, which opponents call the Monsanto Protection Act, would limit the ability of judges to stop Monsanto or the farmers it sells genetically modified seeds from growing or harvesting these crops, even if the courts find evidence of potential health risks. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary. And we have a guest on tonight who's had a lot of experience with GMOs and companies who perpetrate food-borne illness on people, and that's Bill Marler. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Okay, let me introduce you to people, and then we can talk a little bit. Bill Marler is an attorney, and he's a national expert on food safety. He's become the most prominent foodborne illness lawyer in America and a major force in food policy in the U.S. and around the world. And his firm is Marler Clark. It's a food safety law firm and has represented thousands of individuals in claims against food companies whose contaminated products have caused life-altering injury and even death. And some of the victims he has represented have filed lawsuits against companies like Cargill, ConAgra, Dole, KFC, McDonald's, Peanut Corporation of America, Taco Bell, Wendy's, et cetera, et cetera. We can start with some good news for a change. Did you notice that in Connecticut, they just passed this bill through their legislature, which still has to be signed into law, though it has this odd trigger to make it effective, where they will have labeling, in the state. You there?
Oh yeah, no, I was just actually my child is graduating in an hour today.
Oh, I didn't realize.
No, it's great. It's really awesome. But this was such an important.
Graduating from
high school.
From high school, really? Okay.
Yeah. Well, so I just really wanted it, but this is an important discussion.
Oh no, I'm glad. So I'm glad you could spare the time. Yeah.
And I really appreciate you doing this show. As it relates to the Connecticut bill, and I commend them for doing that. We're going to be trying to do the same thing out here in Washington by initiative of the people to pass a labeling requirement for GMOs. I mean, the reality is that transparency is the most important thing that we have, especially in our food supply, and for consumers to sort of use their pocketbook to make economic decisions. Is really the hallmark of, a free society. And so, I commend those states for, Connecticut. I think Washington's will pass, and that's going to put the pressure right where it should be in the marketplace, and consumers will get to make their own decisions.
Connecticut has this weird, did you notice it has this weird trigger for the law to actually take effect that 3 or 4 states in the surrounding area also have to pass similar laws?
Well, it's a lot like it's a lot like gay marriage and a lot like a lot of other progressive things. It sometimes takes longer than you think it should, but it's really just a matter of time. I mean, if the U.S. economy cannot be based on protecting a particular industry, especially Monsanto, especially when you're trying to play in a global marketplace where, the rest of the world, that we want to sell our products to, they have labeling requirements. So it's really just a matter of time, and it's, they're fighting it to make that extra little bit of profit until inevitably they have to change their behavior. And, I think we just need to push it a little quicker.
Well, that's an optimistic point of view. In this case, not generally being optimistic, but I would agree with that, because if you look at the rest of the world, like countries in Europe and Japan, for instance, this awful thing happened in Oregon, and you can talk a little bit about that.
Exactly.
Maybe. And Japan said, and you could see the economic effects on the people of the United States. Forget the corporation. Japan said, because of what happened in Oregon, and maybe you could explain that, they're not going to buy this whole crop of wheat from Oregon.
That's exactly correct. I mean,
maybe you could explain what happened there. So
sure. What happened in Oregon is that somehow, and I don't think people quite know it yet, but somehow mysteriously some Monsanto GMO corn products were growing, and it was from a seed that has not been utilized in years, and so apparently either a farmer didn't know it or something happened. But when it got, into the marketplace, that's when Japan and I expect other countries are going to put a clamp on the importation of wheat, which is for us out here in the Pacific Northwest, is a huge, huge cash crop for us.
So obviously, farmers in places like that should be completely opposed to Monsanto, right?
Well, they should be. I mean, they've gotten sucked into a system that, almost makes them indentured servants to, GMO products.
There was a supreme...
Starting to see the light. And in fact, sort of maybe a segue into the Monsanto Protection Act.
Yeah.
There was a class action filed on behalf of farmers in Oregon against Monsanto just last week. And we'll see how the Monsanto Protection Act impacts that, and but clearly farmers are economically harmed, and they're going to fight back.
Well, it's really quite extraordinary, and in this case, it's even more extraordinary because you get one particular senator whose name is Roy Blunt from Missouri, who seems to be actually working for Monsanto and then part-time working for the U.S. government.
Yeah, well, some of us think that that's probably not just a Roy Blunt problem, but, a fairly significant majority of the senators.
Yeah, you see that they're in the pocket of a lot of companies. Even this thing with the NSA, I mean, people like, there are weapons manufacturers and intelligence services with huge contracting.
Exactly. But, with respect to the Monsanto Protection Act, and it is, you did a perfectly, great job of describing it, but, I sort of look at, and again, I'm a lawyer, so I believe in the civil justice system in America. Mm-hmm. And I speak around the world about, the ability of, it's an imperfect system because it's a human system, and juries make bad decisions sometimes. But, to have a free society like we have, having the ability for jurors to make decisions and for judges to make decisions is really, frankly, a hallmark of what makes our country sort of function. And I remember giving a speech in front of 500 law students in Shanghai a couple of years ago. And my government minders were not really, pleased with some of the things I said. Yeah. But, the students came up to me afterwards, and they were just, you could just see it in their eyes. These kids who are really clearly smart, clearly understand things. And they're like, you mean someone who's hurt can sue the company that sickened their child, or you can sue your government over something they did? I'm like, yeah, that's what you can do. And, when Senator Blunt and others do things like the Monsanto Protection Act, or when you grant immunities to gun manufacturers, or you pass a law that says you can't sue, McDonald's and Burger King for obesity lawsuits.
Mm-hmm.
That perverts the jury system and the civil justice system, and it, retards progress.
So in other words,
fixing the problem.
So basically, you believe completely in democracy, that people should be given the right to have a jury of their peers decide what's right and wrong, not.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. And again, there's mistakes that get made, and that's natural. But there's a lot of things within a jury system, within the civil justice system. There's appeals, there's rulings, there's precedent. It's a pretty good system when comparing it to the rest of the world. And when you pervert it by, capping a damage, so someone in Oklahoma, if their house burns down because of an electrical problem in a heater, the maximum they can get is $150,000.
Mm-hmm.
But if in California it might be $2.5 million. There's a disconnect in the system where these companies try to pervert the system that benefits them, so they know they can just cap their damage and know what the cost of doing business is.
So it's like bean counting. They can do anything wrong they want to and know that there's a limit to how much they can pay. But to be devil's advocate for a second, I mean, there are such things as frivolous lawsuits. I've seen them myself, in the New York City court system.
And again, you'd not get an argument from me that there's always problems in the system. Always you have to look at that hard. And I think the civil justice system can be much more strong against frivolous lawsuits, mm-hmm. or lawyers that abuse the system, or companies that abuse the system. Lawyers from either side, either the defense or the plaintiff side. There are mechanisms to do that. Sometimes they work better than at other times, but to sort of focus only on that, mm-hmm. not focus on giving Monsanto or the gun lobby or the fast food industry a free ride. I think you're missing people miss the point.
But it has to be. This is like constitutional law 101. It can't be possible that there could be something in a law. Did Obama sign this bill, by the way, into law?
Unfortunately, he did.
Well, he's the one who appointed Michael Taylor from Monsanto to be one of the food czars, right?
Yeah, I've known Michael for 25 years.
Yeah.
Although I understand some of the concerns that people express about Michael vis-a-vis Monsanto. But I'll tell you a couple. I'm not here to apologize.
Whatever. But,
Yeah, no. But a couple things that I think are important. One is Michael was appointed to head of USDA shortly after the Jack in the Box outbreak happened in 1993, and he made a very controversial ruling that seems commonsensical now, where he said that no E. coli 015787, which is that pathogenic form, can be in hamburger. And that was a ruling. The meat industry sued the government. The government fortunately won. Mm-hmm. But that one decision that Michael made in 1994 has saved tens of thousands of people, their lives and severe illnesses.
So it's not all black and white.
It's not all black and white.
What did he do for Monsanto all those years?
He was actually on a advisory committee and inside of Monsanto.
Is that lobbying? Is that lobbying?
Yeah. Well, he didn't do any lobbying per se. The law firm he worked for did lobbying. He did not do lobbying for Monsanto. And I was just recently on a panel with Mike in Boston, just actually not a few weeks before the tragic bombing, mm-hmm. Speaking to the American Association of Healthcare Journalists. And Michael and I were on the panel, and a question was raised about his time at Monsanto. And he told a pretty interesting story about him leaving Monsanto because of his discontent with their decision not to embrace labeling. Mm-hmm. And how he has, since he's been at the FDA, has recused himself from all dealings with anything Monsanto. And I talked to him afterwards and just said, I kind of, wonder how you're feeling now about labeling. And he says, I'm completely in favor of it.
Oh, really?
But I can't, because of the issues raised by the opponents of labeling, I don't feel comfortable, helping make those decisions. So it's a double-edged sword. It's an easy thing to kind of beat up about the revolving door, all of which generally I agree with. But I think on this one, it's not quite black and white.
We're taking it for granted, or I am maybe, in this conversation that genetically modified organisms are something that people should be wary of. Are we just talking about giving people a choice whether or not they want to have these things, want to choose GMO versus non-GMO, or is something really, really wrong with genetically modified organisms, or have we not done enough research?
I think it's a little bit of all those things. There was a great story many, many years ago about a gentleman, a chemist, who was tasked to figure out how to stop engines from knocking. And he came up with adding lead to it. And, of course, it immediately stopped the knocking of the engine.
Right, yeah.
Of course, nobody thought about what that was meaning to the environment and to, human beings by spewing lead into the environment. Everything that we know in the literature points that GMOs are generally safe. But I'm always very suspect of those things, and I think that one of the things about labeling, which is good, is it slows the process down to allow for consumers and scientists to gain some consensus as to, what's safe and what's not. And, I think there's more research to do, and I think it's great for consumers to make those choices and to have that ability and transparency to make those decisions.
Well, why, I think it was in California, right? I mean, why were so many millions of dollars spent to prevent the state of California from being able to label food?
Because labeling does cost money, and the companies that don't want labeling make money off the fact that the products are not labeled. And so they even though I think in the long run, and I think it's, not decades away, I think it's years away, but within a few years, the consensus around the country and around the world will be labeling. But they've made the calculus that fighting these battles, even though they spend millions of dollars, still makes them money in the short run by not having labeling.
Mm-hmm.
So
I guess
it's a crass economic deal. It really comes down to.
So what do you think of what do you think of Vilsack as a secretary?
I think he's a decent human being. I know him pretty well. But he's a farm state governor from Iowa, for God's sake. He has been better than most secretaries of agriculture that I've had to deal with in the last 25 years. But in some respects, that's not saying a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. I know you want to get back to the graduation there.
Oh, no. It hasn't started yet.
No,
it's a pretty exciting day.
So, boy, girl, who's it?
I have 3 daughters, for God's sakes. I'm a very lucky man, but my hair is very gray.
So she's is she going to go to college locally or go off to someplace else?
She's actually going to go to a really great Jesuit school here in Seattle called Seattle University. It's a great service institution, and she's studying. She wants to study nonprofit management. So
interesting.
My oldest daughter works for the Gates Foundation, so they're very service oriented kids. They're great.
So she'll be close to home, so that's nice.
Yeah, I'm liking that.
Yeah. So I don't know what, if you just tuned in, we're talking to Bill Marler, who is a very prominent attorney, an expert on food safety, and has sued a lot of corporations, large food companies, fast food companies and other food companies about foodborne illness. I mean, is this an increasing problem in this country, or is it on the way down, or where are we with all this? Because it seems as if there's more that you read all the time. Maybe that's just because there's more information coming your way. I don't know.
I think there is more frequent outbreaks. They tend to be smaller, primarily because we have more technology to be able to find out that we're having an outbreak, and for the most part, a pretty effective public health system. Although budget cuts have,
Yeah.
made that more difficult. But the most of the issue that I deal with, most of the issue of foodborne illness that you see is just, for example, a recent hepatitis A outbreak linked to berries sold at Costco.
Mm-hmm.
350,000 bags of these berries are being recalled. Hundreds of people have hepatitis. Tens of thousands are getting vaccines. And the link is berries grown in Egypt and Turkey are the likely source. So a lot of times what you're dealing with when you're dealing with mass-produced food is you're dealing with mass-produced food that comes from everywhere. And the longer the chain of distribution, the higher the risk that human error or greed will, impact the system, and you'll have a problem. So
the FDA should have its staff increased by tenfold if that's what's going on.
Right? This is going to be, completely, I think for most listeners, they're going to think I'm nuts. But, the meat industry has actually done an incredibly decent job of making our meat supply safer. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better today than it was 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago, 90% of my law firm's revenue was E. coli cases linked to hamburger. Today, it's almost zero. Almost all the cases that I deal with now are E. coli, hepatitis, salmonella cases linked to food that is under the auspices of the FDA.
Oh.
But the FDA has, absolutely no inspectors of any magnitude. But what we've done is we've, outsourced all our inspectors to these third-party auditors that are hired by the companies that they're inspecting.
Hired by the companies. Well, this is just like the garment industry over in Bangladesh.
Exactly. But you get what you pay for. Sure. I mean, in FSIS, which is the meat industry's inspection, the arm of the government that inspects the meat industry,
mm-hmm.
there's 7,500 inspectors. There's one in every plant. They're good union jobs, and these guys and gals do an amazing job of making our food supply safe. But we don't have that sort of core at FDA. Everything's outsourced to people paid for by the industry, and it's a system that is not functioning well.
So, I mean, basically, your suggestion would be, I mean, if you were in charge, you would tremendously.
If I had Mike Taylor's position,
yeah.
I'd be standing in front of Congress saying, I need 50,000 inspectors,
mm-hmm.
and I need them not only in the U.S., I need them on the borders, and I need them in foreign countries that we're buying food from, and we should have that. They should be, paid for by taxpayers, including corporations.
Well, I don't want to keep you. God forbid anybody should need your services. But if they did, how would they, get in touch with you? Obviously, you're the expert in representing people who've been harmed by these things. So, how do people get in touch?
Well, my hope is that, as I testified in front of Congress about 5 years ago, and a Republican Congress member, sort of tried to give me a grief because I'm a lawyer, and I said, Congress member. He was a guy from Texas, and I said, Congress member, if you don't like lawyers so much, pass the laws that you need to improve the food safety system,
mm-hmm.
and you'll put me out of business, and then I'll stop donating, my money to Democratic candidates. I really do hope that eventually, our system puts me out of business, but.
Mm-hmm.
People can find me on the internet at marlerclark.com.
Marler Clark. Okay. Thank you very much for coming on, and congratulations.
Thank you. I thank you very much. It's a great day, and thank you so much for covering a really important issue.
Yeah, sure. Monsanto, there's a whole lot else to talk about. And
there's a lot to talk about.
It's definitely.
If you need me again, give me a buzz.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Bill.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Okay, this is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Left 127. Yeah, Monsanto is right up there now. I think there was a long time, back in the 60s when we were talking about, Agent Orange and other things, and Monsanto is deeply involved in Agent Orange. But DuPont was definitely, for various reasons, at the top of evil corporations. And that's not a word I like to use too much, evil, but definitely DuPont was the Olympic gold medal winner. But Monsanto soon overtook them. And for the last, I'd say, couple of decades, Monsanto they're not even in the same league as everybody else. If there's a trophy like in sports where people have to, contend every year or every 2 years or every 4 years at an Olympic level, Monsanto, they have retired the trophy. Monsanto owns the trophy for the worst corporation in the world when it comes to just being plain dangerous for other people. Even worse than a lot of oil companies and chemical companies in other places. I mean, Monsanto is really something else. I didn't bring in the list of their wonderful achievements, and basically the problem is producing things that do help, because when you give scientists free rein to produce products and you don't have the government or you don't have inspectors or other scientists to check what they're doing or to inspect what they're doing, and it just hits the market when you have total free rein capitalism without any kind of protection for people, scientists will solve a problem. They say to the scientists, you know what, see if you can figure out how to grow a crop that is resistant to our, here's an herbicide that will kill every bad weed and every bad, plant, that was going to destroy your crop in your field, farmers. Here it is for you. It's called Roundup. Here's something that's like a miracle thing. But what it does to people, what the side effects it has on people, that's one thing. The other thing is that how they develop seeds that are resistant. They issue this stuff Roundup, right? Scientists develop this stuff, and it's a boon to farmers, right? It improves their crops because they don't have to deal with all these weeds and all these other things that attack their crops, and that's great. Meanwhile, scientists are a little weak when it comes to morals. They just solve problems. It's like businessmen are concerned about the bottom line. It doesn't matter who gets hurt or who gets in the way of them making profit. And tens of millions of people could be miserable or hurt or live in poverty because of the bottom line. Scientists have a similar kind of thing. I'm not condemning all scientists, but morality is not really as high on their list as it is for some other people. And they say, solve this problem, and they solve it, right? Like he was saying before. There's a knocking in the engine. Okay, let's put lead in the gas. That'll be okay. There's a lot of fires, and they spread from one place to another. Let's put asbestos in the walls. That'll retard the fire. Let's put them in kids' pajamas. That'll keep them from burning. You got to watch out for these people. I'm not excusing them, but they will solve a problem without thinking about the wider effects. And Monsanto has produced products, including Agent Orange and other products, which are so dangerous and so fatal and so awful for people, for mankind in general. And these GMO seeds, most countries in the world, like France, several other European countries, Japan, absolutely, in places in Africa, they refuse to have these genetically modified organisms. And I don't have somebody on here who's an expert. In fact, in the Times today I was reading, and this lawyer said, and he's an expert on this, that nobody has yet proven absolutely that these things are harmful to people. I don't believe that's actually true. I've read reports, and I don't have them in front of me, and I don't have any experts here, but I can get them, who can tell you that they do have harmful effects on human genetics. And you'd be eating food, or you're already eating if you eat anything with corn or corn syrup, you're already in a little bit of trouble. Nobody really knows. And that's the point. Nobody wants to take the time and the money to spend 10 or 20 years studying what will come of this, the effects on human beings. No, the idea is profit is something that has to happen right now. If it's a scientific solution, it has to happen right now. Everybody gets medals, they get bonuses, they get big salaries, and everybody else dies. This is what happens. And Monsanto is the worst there is. They're as bad as anybody's ever been. And DuPont, that's really passing a high level. If you want to call up about this right now, the number is 866-997-4748. We can get some calls from you now. Don't forget, after 7 o'clock, I'm going to lay out some of the details about this NSA spying thing that's been going on. Politicians, the law, the judges, everybody else involved. And I can take your calls on that. That's after 7. We might start in a little while, but first we'll give people a chance to call about Monsanto, about genetically modified organisms, and also about the extraordinary fact that not alone among corporations, but Monsanto is really the most out of control corporation when it comes to actually inserting protections for their corporation alone in bills that are passed by the Congress to protect them against the actual laws of the United States. Quite extraordinary. They're like a government that is even larger and more powerful than our own government. All right, so we'll take some calls right now, and then after that while we'll go to a break, but you hang on and we'll get to your call. So who do we have?
We have Mitch on.
What's that?
Mitch from Montana.
Mitch from you're on. Mitch from Montana, you're on.
Yeah.
Go ahead, you're on.
Hi, I'm an LA-born Canadian truck driver, and I'm calling you from Montana. And can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I hear. Well, it's a little tricky, but go ahead.
Yeah, I've only got one bar right now. But anyway, my question really quick is, I don't. It's not a question; it's a statement. I don't think the issue is the seed. The issue is seed resistance to stronger forms of.
Actually, you know what? We really, the signal is too. Can you call us back? I hope you can hear us. We weren't getting your signal too well, so we'll have to go to somebody else. Call us back. What do we have?
Henry, Oklahoma City.
Okay, Henry from Oklahoma City, you're on.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey.
Look here. The one thing that I have a problem with all these manufacturers and stuff, with all this genetic therapy, with all these seeds and everything else, trying to make it basically grow more with less, but don't know the long-term effects. See, this is why we have rules and regulations. But if the politicians won't make the proper rules to for these companies to follow, what kind of harm is it going to do to us as human beings in this planet?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are we stupid enough to keep eating things and doing things all for profit and then kill each other off?
Well, sometimes you don't even have a choice. In other words, if the people that you elect to protect you, like the federal, the Food and Drug Administration, if the people you elect and who get appointed to protect you from government, if they can't do their job or they won't do their job because they're working for corporations or they're overworked because there's not enough of them, you don't even have a choice. When you're going to eat stuff that you don't even have a choice.
But see, this is my whole point when people start talking about budget cuts and everything else. And this is the thing I try to explain to people. I say, all you idiots running around here complaining about the size of the government. The government don't need to get smaller. It needs to be more efficient, but it needs to be bigger. And they said, what do you mean? I said, because you got to have personnel to do the proper job for every individual section in order for it to work correctly. When you cut people like the FDA or whatever the case may be, the Food and Drug Administration, and then all of a sudden you got all these inspectors who used to be in the area and everything was okay, and now all of a sudden we got rapid mad cow disease, E. coli, all these things going on, and the inspector say, hey, look, I can only go to so many plants in a month. I mean, what you want me to do?
Mm-hmm.
And then people start complaining. Well, stop complaining. It was because you want all these budget cuts, the reason why all this is happening.
I think people people just, they're just ignorant about the way the government works and what's even good for their own selves. So there are so many people in this country who vote against their own interests. They'll vote for a Republican, generally to a Republican congressman or a senator, like this guy Blunt, Roy Blunt from Missouri. They'll vote for somebody who is actually working to change the laws so that huge numbers of people will be harmed by a corporation. And the people in his own state will be harmed by it, but they vote for him anyhow.
Because the numbers say it's okay for that amount of people to die or whatever case may be. I mean, that's an insane policy.
Yeah, I agree. We should no? Okay. You know what we're going to do? We're going to take a break now. Thanks for calling. We're going to take a break. And anybody else wants to call back, it's 866-997-4748. 866-997-4748. It's a good idea that it's a good news actually that Connecticut voted. It was 134-3 in their legislature to have labeling on these foods. We don't know exactly, although in some cases it's been proved, I think, but we don't know exactly the extent of the harm that these genetically modified seeds can do. To people. We don't know what the harm can be to human beings, and we're going to have to look over sometimes maybe decades to see what the harm is. But until then, these things, people should have a choice between, because there's a lot of organic food. There's a lot of food that is deliberately grown without these seeds because people don't trust them and they worry about them. And all Americans are asking, and it's only right, we the people, is that we have a label on this food so we can decide whether we want to take the chance to eat it or not. That's all. Now, most of it is soy and corn right now, but it's spreading to other things too. Anyhow, we're going to take a break. If you're calling and you're on the line, we'll get back to you after the break, or if you want to call during the break, we'll get right to you afterwards. Let's go to a break. Okay, we're back, and we have some callers on the line. You can join them if you want. Who do we have?
Mitch.
Mitch, you're on. Mitch, go ahead.
Hey, hi, Mike. I don't know how long I'm going to have a speaker for, so I'll make this really fast.
Okay.
I think that the corporations and the corporate media and Monsanto have changed the argument about seed. They want us to be talking about seed because seed doesn't sound so potently disastrous for the human body. But I think the real issue is the fact that what they've made these genetically modified seeds to do is to accept higher doses of pesticides without killing the plant. So what they're doing is it's not the seed that's going to kill us; it's the higher doses of pesticides.
Right, right. And Penn, and everybody knows very well what the effects of these pesticides are. I mean,
Well, yeah, we've known for how many decades, right? And so that was the only comment I wanted to make. I'd just like to see more of the argument, involve that part of the.
That's an excellent point, and it's something I should have mentioned. I mean, for instance, take things like DDT. I mean, people have been spraying stuff and putting stuff around on crops for a long time, and in fact, it does kill weeds, and it does save crops. Some of this stuff actually enhances the growth of crops, but it is the pesticides and all these things that have caused a tremendous amount of deaths and illnesses and birth defects. So people should be aware of that. Yeah,
that's kind of that was the discussion I wanted to hear. But, that was it. That was all I wanted to say.
Well, that's good.
It's like a Roundup. It's like Roundup stops killing your seeds, so your weeds, so you start using twice as much. So great.
Well, from what I'm hearing too, it's also gotten to the point where Roundup is not even effective anymore. So it's also already saturated and it's not even working. And people are having to use even stronger pesticides,
Right. And they're already fearful about how Roundup was going to affect the human body. So now they're going to come out with a stronger Roundup to kill the stronger weeds that are resistant to the first Roundup. And we're still going to be in the same physiological situation. We're just going to be getting twice the dose of the pesticide.
Well, I mean, obviously Monsanto is in the business of killing things. We're just not sure exactly. We're just not exactly sure.
People.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like people, weeds. I mean, what's the difference? It's the bottom line we're talking about here. And they killed a lot of people Monsanto killed a lot of people in Vietnam, but that's what their job was. That's what they got paid for, and they've never been made to pay anything back to the people. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who have died or gotten birth defects from Monsanto over there,
Yeah, they don't care.
All right, thanks for calling.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, who do we have?
Elliot.
Okay. we're
Hey,
Elliot, you're on.
Mike.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Elliot.
Yeah, I don't know. I've said things about Monsanto before, I think, on your show, and one of the points follows what your previous caller said about, the increasing resistance to Roundup on Roundup-ready Monsanto product. Well, when you look at BGH, what you find is not only will the BGH produce more milk, but you have to feed the animal more, okay, and then you have to add in more antibiotics because they're more likely to have udder infections because they have to be over-milked. So, these are not set in stone, absolutes that they improve agriculture. Your costs go up precipitously, and then that means that you have to either have more land that you're producing on, or you have to have more cows, or you have to have a larger operation, and continuing to upgrade and upgrade and upgrade. Now, with BT, with Bacillus thuringiensis, where they took the genetic material which kills certain Lepidopteran larvae, okay, they took it out of what was basically the zone which allowed or stopped any kind of resistance occurring because it was within the organism itself, okay, when it was just a semi-organic product where you could spray the bacteria onto something and then it would control the Lepidopterans, the larvae of moths that were eating, say, your cabbages, okay, in a cabbage worm situation. But when you take that genetics out and you start putting it into the plant, you've taken out the part which stops any kind of distribution of the genetics outside of the bacteria. If I'm explaining myself.
No, I understand. It's roughly similar to when people are told not to take too many antibiotics because it prevents your own body from producing its natural resistance to diseases.
It's similar, right?
Yeah.
Right. But then when you take that code, that material, genetic code, which when it gets into the gut of a larvae, there's some kind of change which occurs, and the bacteria create a crystal, which then kills the larvae, right? Well, what is the impact when it goes into a human being's gut?
Yeah.
You see?
That's what I've been reading. Is there's a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of this stuff that's in these seeds, in these plants, in this food is aggregating in your own intestines and preventing your own intestines from doing the job that they're supposed to do, creating all kinds of illnesses there. So every time, if you eat meat, if you drink milk, there's all kinds of things that have been treated with this stuff. And you wind up, with this resistance, which is alien to your own body, which will not allow you to defend yourself against bacteria.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's what happens.
And like your guest said, it's going to take 20 years of serious, very concentrated research in order to establish that it is deleterious or that there's no problem at all. Mm-hmm. And nobody's going to pay for that, unless the government decides it's going to do it, and you know what the climate is.
Well, but that's what you've been hearing. If you listen to this show after about 6 months, the last 3 months, the last 2 months, finally we're beginning to understand that there is no way at the national level that we're going to get any protection or help. In fact, it's just the opposite. So we're going to have to insist on these things in municipalities, in towns, in states, and then work our way up. I'm going to have to move on.
Hey, Mike, one last thing.
Go ahead.
There is one rumor out there, and I don't know if I've been able to really establish that it's true, although it does seem to be increasingly the case, that Monsanto just recently bought up Seed Savers, which used to be an independent organization of growers who would trade seeds back and forth with each other. And somehow they got a hold of the stock of these homegrown, long-time genetic stocks that people had been collecting for years and years and years and years. And it'd be interesting if any of your guests or any of your people who listen to your show know anything more about that. So,
well, if they do,
again, Mike.
If they do, they should call. All right. Do we have any other callers right now? I'm sorry.
Someone just called out.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi. You're on. Go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to talk to Mike Fader.
Yeah, speaking. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Steve. My father, he was over in Vietnam and served in the war there, and about 6-7 years ago, he died from pancreatic cancer.
Oh, we lost that call. What happened? Call's just lost. No way of knowing?
That was my fault.
Oh, okay. Listen, Steve, is that Steve? Call back. We just lost your call. It was an accident. Somehow, something went wrong somewhere. So give us a call back. I did want to mention, I don't want to start a whole new subject here because I'll just mention this, and maybe this is sort of a segue to this and to the National Secrets Act and to all the stuff that's going on with the NSA and spying and all the secrecy and the classification of documents and the government getting away with things and then leaks being needed to reveal them. Bradley Manning went on trial this week, finally, down in Fort Meade, which is outside of Baltimore. And his trial, and we'll be following this trial. Now, whatever you think of Bradley Manning, and his motives were obviously complex, this is something we're going to be discussing on an ongoing basis. So stay tuned here. And also, you can try also going to my Facebook page. It's called Occupied Territory. It's basically about income inequality. It's about any kind of political discussion. It's called Occupied Territory. It's not about the Middle East. It's about here, about the rich occupying the United States and squeezing the rest of us out. So it's on Facebook. It's called Occupied Territory. Check in there because I post essays on there and put interesting articles on there, and we get responses and kind of arguments and debates on there. So who do we have? Is it Steve again? Steve, I'm sorry, we lost your call. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, great. It's good to talk to you. What I was saying earlier, my father served in the Vietnam War in the late 60s, and he was exposed to Agent Orange in the warehousing of the chemical. And as a direct result, years later, he ended up with pancreatic cancer and type 2 diabetes, which with the studies there showing that is caused by the Agent Orange.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And then I didn't know it, but all through my childhood, I realized that my skin on my hands and feet would peel at different stages of the year. Mostly going in the winter, and I thought that might have been, just...
Oh, it probably was, because a lot of this is what happens to children that were born 10, 20, 30 years after the war in Vietnam.
Yes, sir. Well,
yeah.
Okay. The ongoing thing is it's not just stops at me. Now my children have the same problems. And if we don't get a grip on Monsanto and this genetically altering plants and using all these chemicals, that we're going to have some really messed up children down the road.
Well, we already do, but basically, I think maybe. Well, it's hard to say, but when you have senators like Senator Roy Blunt, Blunt, of Missouri, who basically worked for Monsanto, and then they're senators afterwards, basically a man like that is a criminal. I mean, if somebody is hurt by something Monsanto makes, he should go to jail, but that's not the way the world works. We have one more call, right? We're going to move on, take one more call. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for calling, Steve. Who do we have? Chuck, you're on. Chuck, go ahead.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Okay.
I tuned in kind of late, so I don't know if you guys covered this or not, but I heard something about genetically modified corn leavings in the fields after harvest being turned over in the soil and all that pollen having an effect on the bee population.
Yeah, well, that I don't know about. Now, that's one thing I don't know about. But, of course, everybody does know the fact that the honeybee population in this country is in dire jeopardy. It practically ceased to exist, So it could, for all I know, it could be that.
I remember hearing something about it. I wish I could remember more details. I'm sorry, but,
yeah, well, that's certainly possible.
A very strong indication.
Yeah, no, it's possible. I've heard various things put forward. I mean, like, cell phone towers that are all over the place have misled their guidance system, so they never made it back to the hive. Then there was
this was more of a serious study.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't know it, but I'm
with some positive results. I can't say specifically that it was a dead ringer, but
well, the basic answer and the point to all of this is that a company like Monsanto, which is out to make billions of dollars, and it does, which uses scientific methods to alter the genetics of things, which puts very dangerous chemicals on, vast areas of the country and other parts of the planet when they can get away with it, has to be kept. There has to be a leash on this company. There have to be laws protecting us from them. There have to be inspectors checking everything they do. And they can't issue these products out into the world until they've been tested more. Until that happens, we're all in jeopardy.
I absolutely agree.
That's it. Okay, I think actually that's it. We don't have any more calls this hour. So don't forget, we're going to talk about the NSA and spying. And I know a lot of you have opinions about this. Mr. Obama was speaking the other day at a news conference about something, and somebody asked him a question about it. And in the end, he said, as far as he was concerned, it's a balance. We have to choose between, it can't be 100% openness and 100% security. In other words, we have to make some balance or make some adjustments between whether we want to be secure, protected from terrorism, or whether we want to have a completely open society and the Fourth Amendment actually does apply and the government doesn't invade our privacy. He's saying it's up to you. You have to have a choice. Of course, it's not up to us. And there's plenty of things to talk about there, but this is one of the issues. It's a balance. So one of the points to make, and I'll restate this point after 7 o'clock news on this whole issue is it really a choice? Are we dealing with a choice here? Now, the government has told us that they have prevented, I think it's the last count, they're finally saying what they're doing because they've been made to say what they're doing. In other words, they would continue doing all these things in secret, and worse, if somebody didn't leak documents. So the people who do leak these documents are actually heroes of democracy. I don't throw that word around too lightly, but I would call them heroes. Anybody who blows the whistle on the government destroying our basic constitutional freedoms is actually a hero because they're risking their lives. They're risking, 20, 30, 40 years life in jail. And they're risking that, they're doing it for purposes of conscience. So the president said the other day, for instance, he said, well, I think we should have a debate on this, and it's a good thing. And then in the same breath, he says, and we're going to go after these leakers. Well, let me tell you something. Pal, Barry, Barack, whatever your name is, there wouldn't be a fucking debate at all if they didn't leak the documents. That's the point. Okay? So that's just one of the points, and we'll get a little bit more into this. And I think what a good thing to do starting at around 7 o'clock is I will read you the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, and we will take it from there. So you want to punch in? Do you want to punch in a little piece of music there? I mean, you know, anything? Just choose one of those places I give you. Just punch it. No? Yes? No, I didn't give you enough of a head start, right? That wasn't fair. Okay. Okay, we're back. This is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127. If you are just tuning in for the first time, this show is live every Saturday night from 5 to 8 Eastern Time and 2 to 5 Western Time. It also plays on demand on Sirius, if you know about Sirius On Demand. To get in touch with me or to find out more about what I do in the world in terms of, for instance, I have a new book out. It's called A Long Swim Upstream. You could check that out on Amazon. And there's other stuff I do in the radio. There's essays I've written, other books I've written. All of this will be available to you and more if you go to my website. It's called Fader Files, FEDERFILES.com. So that's where you go to contact me. Join my mailing list and find out all about this other stuff. Also, if you want to get involved in this constant political debate that goes on all the time and you're on Facebook, go to Occupied Territory on Facebook, and I post stuff there all the time. So you're all aware, obviously there's nobody listening to me right now who's not aware of the fact that the big story this week, and more than a big story, the historical announcement this week is that a story broke in The Guardian, and this is the state that America's media, the press, the what is it called, the Fourth Estate. This is the state of the media in the United States. One of whose job is to keep check on the government. It's understood. It's not laid out in the Constitution, obviously, but everybody understands that without a free press, which stems from free speech, without these kinds of investigative journalists or people just expressing their opinions or informed opinions, we could always hope, we can't have a democracy. It doesn't exist without a free press and without free speech, which underlies that. This is what it's come to in this country. To find out about one of the greatest crimes, in my opinion, committed against the American people in our history, and a violation of the Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy and to be secure against government interference in our lives. The biggest story was broken by a British newspaper, the Guardian newspaper, which was reprinted in other places, the Washington Post and New York Times, and now it's all over the internet and it's everywhere. And of course, the immediate defense of the government. Well, let's start from the beginning. That will be a new thing for me. So I tell you what, who's going to take bets? You want to take bets? Who wants to bet that I am not going to launch into a half-hour vituperative sermon on the ills of government as it's constituted right now? Who wants to bet that I'm not going to go off the deep end like I always do for half an hour, and I'm just going to present various scenarios and facts and let you call? I'll leave the betting up to you. So let us start off with what happened. The NSA, it has been revealed by a leaked top-secret document. This is a top secret document that it says even in the court order, there's something called the FISA court, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, whatever. And this court order, which compelled, because it was brought by the Justice Department, the FBI, whatever, NSA, it compelled Verizon Company and one of its subsidiaries to turn over the phone logs. That is not the actual content of each phone call, but who people called, how long the duration of the call was, to turn over the phone logs of millions of American citizens without anybody knowing it. Verizon was forced by a court order to do that. They could have defended themselves against it. They could have hired lawyers, but they were compelled to do this because, you know, the heads of Verizon would wind up in jail, God forbid. You know, it's not as if they've been cheating the government of not paying taxes or anything like that. You know, I mean, they're perfectly clean. But, you know, they could have fought it, but they didn't. They were compelled. This judge who signed this is one of the, I think it's 9 FISA judges, Federal, Foreign Intelligence Security Act. And it's not so foreign anymore. That's the point. They spied on Americans. They requested and demanded the phone logs of millions of Americans. We're talking about hundreds of millions, billions of telephone call records. Then it spread, and we find out that not only that, but they have requested and gotten hundreds of millions, if not billions, of emails. And the email, it's not just the log of who sent an email to who. The email actual content of it is available. So whatever anybody wrote to anybody, and it's not just from here. The idea was supposed to be if it was connected to somebody foreign who they suspected of possibly being involved in terrorist activities, or if it bounced back from some suspect phone number or address, email address in a foreign country that they were tracking or following that looked suspicious to them, whoever they are. We don't know that either. And it bounced back to some Americans, and they could demand that information by court order. Here it was just like throwing a giant blanket over the entire country, a net over the whole country, and fishing for everything. Instead of actually isolating one group of people, there's no probable cause involved here. The probable cause in this case that they issued the warrant for all this was that you're an American citizen and you spoke to somebody on the phone or you sent an email. That's now the probable cause. So we have to look to a British newspaper to tell us what's going on inside our own government. We have to look to a British newspaper to see one of the greatest violations of American freedoms in the history of the United States. That's the state of our current media. Shameful, abject pieces of shit that they all are. Piling in the millions of dollars for being anchors and hosts of their shows and reporting what they say is the news, forget about it. If it wasn't for the internet, and if it wasn't for these foreign journalists or American journalists publishing in foreign newspapers, because this was a guy named Glenn Greenwald, who's a fascinating character. He's a lawyer, and he's been a long time been an activist, and he writes for The Guardian. So somebody leaked this document. Somebody employed by the NSA or the FBI leaked this top secret document. This document is so top secret that in the order that the judge, it's a 4-page order, and you can check it out online, and this is interesting. If you want to be theoretically violating the Official Secrets Act so that you could be prosecuted, you can do it. I have done. I have possibly violated the Official Secrets Act along with millions of Americans right now because I've looked at this top secret document. This is a document which was not supposed to be seen by anybody except a few people who were involved in this. The lawyer from the Justice Department, whoever, or people involved in this. And the judge himself and a couple of people at Verizon who were compelled to produce all these logs. This 4-page United States court document is reproduced online. Just put in, you Google, Vinson. It's the name of the court. That's the name of the judge. Vinson. Vinson, court order, NSA. And you will come up with this 4-page document. You'll see his signature scrawled on there. It's grandiose. It looks like Napoleon signed it, right? So you'll see all this stuff. What interests me is that I looked at this, of course, because I want to see what it says, and it's extraordinary in what it says. This is a warrant from a judge in the United States to collect records with no probable cause. In other words, they've given up trying to find people who are bad people. They've decided that we're all possibly bad just because we make calls and we're American citizens. We could all be terrorists. We are all terrorists. It's just a question of catching us now. And so, first of all, foreign newspaper has to report this. So shame on the American press and American television and all of them. Let us go to what the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution says. I'll tell you a little bit about the history of this. First of all, the amendment says this. This is the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, as written by the founders of this country and our democracy. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but except upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized. Right? This is essential stuff. This is the Fourth Amendment. This is the right to privacy in what we write, what we say, what we do, where we congregate, what we do in our own homes. To purses, unreasonable searches against, in our houses, papers and effects. Why did they write this? Because, of course, the British colonial authorities would just have soldiers kick in the door or walk into anybody's houses back before the Revolution and look for goods that were not checked by the customs, that were smuggled in or whatever it was. And they had no respect for anybody's right of privacy. So this is what you have. A little bit background to this, seeing the danger this is a general warrant. In other words, a British court in those days, a colonial court, could just issue a warrant and just say, go ahead and search this place. We don't know if they're guilty or not. They probably are. Kick in the door, walk in there, take anything you want, seize it, and we'll deal with it. We'll deal with the legality later. Of course, there is no legality. So seeing the danger, general warrants represented. The Virginia Declaration of Rights in 1776, which preceded the Fourth Amendment, explicitly forbade the use of general warrants. In other words, you can't throw a net over everybody just in case somebody might be guilty. The prohibition became precedent for the Fourth Amendment. The general warrants, whereby any officer or messenger may be commanded to search suspected places without evidence of a fact committed, or to seize any person or persons not named or whose offense is not particularly described and supported by any evidence, this is a grievous and oppressive thing and ought not to be granted. Yeah, right. It's called, or used to be called, America. The Fourth Amendment has been held to mean that generally a warrant must be judicially sanctioned for a search or an arrest. In order for such a warrant to be considered reasonable, it must be supported by probable cause and be limited in scope according to specific information supplied by a person, usually a law enforcement officer. Yeah, good luck. Who is sworn, yes, yeah, right, and accountable to the issuing court. Let me tell you, that's the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. Let me tell you about the judge who issued this. The judge, first of all, get this. Who appoints the judges who issue these astounding warrants, which violate the basic freedoms of America and the Constitution? The Chief Justice, you may not know this, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Mr. Roberts, or whoever the Chief Justice is right now, it's Mr. Roberts, John Roberts. He appoints personally. They're not elected. They're not overseen by Congress. He appoints, this one man appoints the FISA judges who can sign these warrants. They're the ones who sign all these warrants. Let's see. At this point, it's not clear who first authored the order that is signed by the judge that allowed the National Security Agency to collect the telephone records of millions of U.S. Verizon customers. According to the Washington Post, the order appears to be a routine renewal of a similar order first issued in 2006. But the most recent order, this is the one that you'll see reproduced online that is causing this. This is Exhibit A in a lawsuit. If I was a lawyer, I would bring against the United States government for trying to violate the constitutional rights of Americans. The most recent order was signed by U.S. District Court Roger Vinson. And this is I forget where I got this from, Alternet or some other blog. And the more you learn about him, the more it makes sense that he would authorize such a sweeping program. Vinson is a Reagan appointee and former Navy lieutenant who briefly came into media consciousness in 2011 when he struck down Obamacare in its entirety from his seat in Florida. He's a district court judge in Florida. His much-touted Obamacare ruling, or he could be an appeals court judge, his much-touted Obamacare ruling was basically meaningless, with the Affordable Care Act being weighed by the Supreme Court already, but still caused a stir because of its sweeping rejection of the new law, Medicare discounts and all. In his opinion, Vinson also lifted language straight from the Family Research Council, a fundamentalist Christian right-wing group. He lifted language from them that they wrote to explain why the government had no right to penalize inaction. This is a debate still. He was also the source of the infamous broccoli meme. If they decided that everybody needs to eat broccoli because broccoli is healthy, they could mandate that everybody has to buy a certain amount of broccoli each week, which was followed all the way to the Supreme Court. But this was not the first time that Roger Vinson, this is the judge who signed the order, issued some strange or questionable verdicts. In his first major case as a judge in 1985, get this, a jury found two couples guilty of planning to bomb 3 Florida abortion clinics, the men for bomb making and the women for conspiracy. On the judge's orders, The 4 were freed on bond for a month before being sentenced, the men to prison and the women to probation. Yeah, let them out. These are people who the government had an excellent case. They'd already proven it practically, that these people were dangerous people who wanted to bomb an abortion clinic. He let them out for a month before they were sentenced. Didn't keep them in jail, or didn't think they were threats. Let's see. Vinson also ruled in 1998 that the government did not need to fulfill promises first made in the 1940s and 50s to provide health care for life to service members who had completed 20 years of service. The decision also voided the promise to provide health care to the members' families, et cetera, et cetera. This is a right-wing judge appointed by Ronald Reagan. And so, but the more deeper point to all of this is that one man, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who is not elected, not overseen by anybody in Congress, appoints the judges to make decisions based on the entire Bill of Rights. Structurally, this is totally un-American, and this is wrong. And the reaction of the government, of Dianne Feinstein, who is the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and I think his name is Saxby Chambliss from Georgia, who's a Republican, who's second in charge. The reaction of congressmen and senators generally was to be out, and the president, to be outraged at this leak. In other words, they're going to try to find this person and shoot him full of holes, tase him, lock him up, and put him in jail for the rest of his life for the evil thing he did. And what did he do? He leaked a document which showed that the United States government has violated every single American's rights down to the foundation of the American government. That they have actually taken the Constitution and set it on fire. So this guy leaked that. The first thing that these people do, instead of saying, we have to change all this, we're ashamed that it's gotten to this point. This is horrible. Our system is out of control. We're living in a tyranny. We don't have a democracy anymore. We have to change everything like the Church Committee did in 1975. No. What's the first reaction of these basically tyrants to this leak? To this person who is, in fact, a hero as far as I'm concerned, because nobody else was stopping them. The first response is, this is reprehensible. I've got all these quotes, so I'm not going to read. This is disgusting. This is reprehensible. Now, the government claims, and who knows to believe them or not, right? I'm not saying that they didn't prevent, that this kind of behavior has not prevented a terrorist attack. The government claims now that they're pushed to do it. In other words, all this is done in secret. They are spending billions of dollars every year, no exaggeration, billions of dollars building these gigantic collection centers for the NSA, which are as big as 10 football fields of computers and people to coordinate data that they get from them. They are catching every single email, every call made by everybody to anybody about anything in this country and any email. Does that sound like a democracy to you? And this is to prevent terrorist attacks. The government has issued, now the Senate Intelligence Committee oversees this. There's a handful, not even the whole Congress knows about this, just a handful of people who are senators and who are Congress people who know about what the NSA is doing. And these people are generally in the pocket of the Intelligence Committee. Take somebody like Senator Feinstein, Democrat, Republican. Of course, it doesn't make any difference anymore. At that level, they're all the same. She is outraged that somebody leaked this document. She should be outraged that there is even a FISA court that allows this kind of thing in the first place. She should be outraged that there's this kind of secrecy. This is what happens. This is another example of why people in this country, 95% of the people in this country, don't vote and or consider that the government in Washington is a separate entity, almost like a feudal castle with moats around it that has nothing to do with the general populace anymore. So their reaction was to this. The guy who leaked this document, who they will probably prosecute and try to put in jail, is a well-known, intelligent lawyer and journalist named Glenn Greenwald. He got this document, and he said the world needs to know about this, especially the United States people need to know about this, publishes it in there, and describes a program called PRISM, P-R-I-S-M, which is supplied naturally, what else, by a private contractor to the NSA and to the FBI and everybody else. and you can go online and find this too. It's PRISM. It's like a company, right? They tell you exactly how they will get this information. It'll be from Google, and this is what you can do with it, right? So you should know that every time you send any email to anybody about anything, in fact, probably any document that is on your computer right now or in your phone right now, any call you make to anybody is available to spies and members of the federal government who are accountable to no one, except maybe the Supreme Court justice, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, maybe the president, and some other people. And the president says the other day that he says, well, we should have a debate about this. Well, the only reason that we're going to have a debate about this now, and we are having a debate about this now as much as we can have, because he's right away, he and Congress are immediately pulling the State Secrets Act and, the Military Secrets Act on this. Nobody is supposed to look into this anymore. We've been bad boys and girls. We disobeyed mom and dad, the government, and now we have to stay in our rooms. We're grounded. We're not even allowed to find out what went wrong. They've already pulling state secret on us. This sounds much more to me like Russia and China. I guess whoever bet that I wouldn't do this lost their bet. So basically that's what's going on. And on the other side, as I say, the government has listed 9 separate incidents where there might have been bombings of the New York subway, and they give details. Finally, they're giving details. Why are they giving details? Because they've been made to give details. All people are asking this government to do is don't treat us like terrorists, criminals, and children. We are equal to them. They are not in charge of us. They're not our wardens. They're not the cops. We are all American citizens together. The reason people don't vote and don't believe in the government is because they treat us this way. So all we're asking them is, and finally they're doing it because they've been made to do it, is explain what they're doing and how it has helped us. If I heard, and they list all these things, there was a bombing they stopped, some guy going over the George Washington Bridge who was headed for the New York subway system. They stopped another bombing. They stopped this terrorist attack. Good. I'm glad to hear it. I still don't know, and I doubt if I would, I like them to keep tapping everybody's phone and everybody's email all the time. I think it's too much. I think when you do that, you defeat the whole purpose of having a democracy. So why not just have a pure dictatorship, which is where we're headed anyhow? But yeah, that's all anybody's asking them, is it too much secrecy? If you say that doing this is going to save our lives or save thousands of lives or tens of thousands of lives, prove it to me. Don't lie to me. Don't cover it up. Show me that you need these billions of dollars to spy on me for my own good, and maybe I might agree with you. But that's the essence of the problem. Structurally, we don't live in a democracy anymore. There's probably one or two other things I could bring up, but I think that about covers it. The number here is 866-997-4748, 866-997-4748, and we'll take your calls. Go ahead. Who do we have?
Dennis.
Dennis, you're on, Dennis.
Hey, Mike. Hey, I had a couple of points I want to make, and if you want me to elaborate on them, I will. First off, there's a couple of things that the mainstream media is not covering, and I realize they're
no. What? No, that's a shock. Wait a minute.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how much I want to blame them for this in particular, but there's a classist element to this. Like I've noticed, if you're a low level guy like Bradley Manning, all right, we'll just take him as an example. They are going to literally crucify you. They're going to go after your family. They're going to confiscate your property. They're going to imprison you. They're going to do everything. But if you're a quote unquote senior level or high level leaker, like let's say Paula Broadwell, you walk, okay? Now, other aspect of this I don't think anyone's covering is, what is Al-Qaeda? Al-Qaeda apparently is now the enemy. But no American is asking for a clear definition of that. And what I mean is, and here's what scares me about all this acquisition of data. They can still label whoever they want Al-Qaeda. And the reason why I bring this up is the other day there was a liberal, what I call a butt-weight liberal, was saying, but wait, they're not, it's not like they're going to use this to stop you from getting elected to public office. And I'm sitting there thinking, public office, you can disappear. with this data they're collecting, you could have like a unibrow, or say you read the Quran at one time, and you could disappear in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean, let's forget about, elected office. Then the other thing I was thinking about, and I'd like, earlier you said, you called China a corporate dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
Well, given what we know now, about, the Fourth Amendment, First Amendment out the window and everything, what really, other than the one-child policy, what really separates the United States right now from what we call communist China?
Less and less all the time. There is less of a separation in our political system and theirs all the time, sadly.
Yeah, it's really sort of troubling, I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking about, and believe me, I was a huge Obama supporter, and I still am. I think a lot of this is legacy stuff he inherited from the Bush administration. But I am really right now thinking about, I think we need I've been thinking about the Alien and Sedition Act, because this is like a high-tech, similar circumstance. I'm thinking that maybe we need a Thomas Jefferson. We need maybe a third-party candidate for 2016. I don't know. I'm thinking about maybe Governor Ventura. Ventura or something like that.
Well, somebody, yeah, because obviously these two parties have molded into one party. You know what? We're talking about the Democrats and the Republicans. Anybody who talks about the Democrats versus the Republicans is setting up a false game for us to watch while they pull the rug from under us. We're talking about Democrats versus Republicans. It's a big bubble. You have to think outside that now. The Democrats and the Republicans cannot seem to agree on anything. They can't agree on feeding old people. They can't come to a solution on Meals on Wheels, on fixing Medicaid. They can't fix the sequester. They can't figure out how to supply food stamps for people so they can actually eat. But one thing that they managed to agree on is violating all of our rights in the Bill of Rights. That's what they finally got together to do. Listen, I should move on a little bit. I want to mention also that before we take any more calls, that that this has been going on in this country for a long time. Almost as soon as there were phones, there were phone taps going on. I mean, this stuff started in the 20s and 30s, really, on a big basis, and it was J. Edgar Hoover, who was working for the FBI, working for the Justice Department. And when they created the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he was made, he was put in charge at the age of, 28 or 31 or something like that. And Hoover was notorious for bugging people, tapping phones, people he considered to be troubling or enemies to the United States. And he decided it all by themselves. He decided all by himself who was an enemy. And he was a right-wing, conservative, actually cross-dressing, bizarre individual who lived like a mole inside of a bunch of places and was afraid of germs and dirt. A real lunatic. He's the one who made the decision. He illegally infiltrated crowds. He had people creating disturbances so the police could come in. He bugged people without warrants. He did all this stuff. He blackmailed all kinds of people. So this has been going on for a long time. And finally, things got so bad in 1975. We had Frank Church, who was a Democratic senator and lawyer, and he raised the alarm about the NSA's sprawling tentacles. The NSA has been around since 1952. Interestingly, the NSA was instituted at the height of the Red Scare, of the insane communist paranoia in this country, which ruined people's lives and made tremendous inroads on our freedoms, right? This happened in 1952. That's when Truman set up the National Security Agency in that crazy fundamentalist paranoia kind of climate, right, against people who really weren't enemies of the country, particularly at that point. So Frank Church in 1975 raised the alarm at the agency's sprawling tentacles as the NSA. During a series of hearings into the work of the national intelligence agencies, he warned that the NSA's magnifying glass could be turned inwards on the American people. This is a quote from Frank Church. "I don't want to see this country ever go across that bridge," he said. "I know the capacity that is there to make tyranny total in America, and we must see to it that this agency, the NSA, and all agencies that possess this technology operate within the law and under proper supervision so that we never cross over that abyss, and that abyss from which there is no return." And we are now in the process, and I say we again, here I am using that word, they are in the process of crossing this bridge, and they're going to throw us off the bridge. We're not even needed by them anymore. They just want us to turn out every 2 years and 4 years and vote for them. Then we can go fuck ourselves. Then we can work for $4 an hour. Then we can lose our jobs. Then we can lose our houses. And then we can be guinea pigs for whatever, scientific experiment they want to make or corporate predation that they want to unleash on us. This is what it's come to. This is an invasion of our privacy in the worst possible way. They need to stop it. So they shouldn't be pursuing the leaker. They should be looking at themselves in the mirror and either resigning or be indicted themselves by a special grand jury. So who do we have next?
Hold on.
Anybody. Just put somebody on. This is getting silly. Just put somebody on.
They're up, Stephen.
Stephen. Okay, you're on, Stephen. Go ahead.
Hello, Mike.
Yeah.
I'm surprised John Yoo isn't teaching this in his law class. We're talking about the Fourth Amendment. Mm-hmm. Well, the Third Amendment has a word, and that word is law. And the Fifth Amendment, the one following, has the word crime. The words law and crime do not exist in the Fourth Amendment. And so John Yoo could naturally rationalize this by saying it will be a reasonable search and seizure if it is believed that those words and those ideas are threatening to the power structure. Mm-hmm. You get it? Mm-hmm. So wait, here's a little bit more of a brain twist. Houses, papers, affirmation. I have titles and papers, and the affirmation is the Internet. And I sent letters on the Internet titled like Our Little Secret. And I knew that the NSA would look at that email that I sent to that individual. And it was Our Little Secret. And if they want to torture me to find out what it is...
Nobody's going to torture you. Who cares about you? You're just a citizen.
I'll tell them what the secret is. They could use this to blackmail me. I mean, this is what it's about. It's about to suppress blackmail, extortion. I looked at Susie's underpants on the playground when I was 10 years old. So there's the confession. I've been tortured, and there's the confession.
Okay. So who do we have? Thanks for calling. Who do we have next? Go ahead. You're on the air.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Ed. I'm in Texas.
Hi, Ed. Go ahead.
You're giving a very good lecture, and it really strikes deep inside my feelings and heart. The government has set up systems of surveillance in every part of our lives, with everything we do in our society. And I'm in touch with people who are aware of some of the other areas of surveillance, and I don't see surveillance of the Internet or phone calls as being the only threat that we have to our constitutional rights of freedom from invasion from the government. Let me give you an example that some friends of mine brought up. When you drive on a public highway, I'm sure in your area there are cameras.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Taking pictures, especially in toll roads. Those photographs made of vehicles going by now have license plate recognition, mm-hmm. and in addition, facial recognition. Those records are more than likely archived in a government database in Virginia, in NSA's database. They're available for example, a week later, if there's a tragedy and they want to know all the license plates of all the vehicles that were within a certain area within a certain time, they can run a scan on that database and get a picture, not only a picture of each license plate, but immediately the name of the owner of that license plate, and more than likely a photograph of the driver of that vehicle.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second. Let me just say, let's say I'm a law enforcement officer and somebody does a hit and run, and they mow down 5 kids outside of a school and they speed off, but the license plate recognition catches them. In other words, if I'm a law enforcement officer and I want to bring bad guys to justice, isn't this a good tool to have?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. That's the argument for the government having surveillance on all public activity. And I say public. It doesn't mean in your house. Once you go in your house, close the door. That surveillance ends unless
But it doesn't end. That's the point. If they've got the phone logs and email, it doesn't end.
Let's access what the government is now defining. See, what they've done is redefined what is public airway, public communication.
Right.
Right now, anything you put on an email is considered part of the public thoroughfare of information.
Mm-hmm.
No different than a public highway. No different than walking down the street in New York and having facial recognition cameras take pictures of every person and store those in a database for access.
So what do you think about that? What do you think about that? I mean, it's a new world. When the founders were writing the Constitution, they didn't know about dirty bombs, nuclear weapons, terrorist attacks, and they didn't know about the internet. So would they have written the fourth? You know,
what the founders did know is about spies.
Mm-hmm.
And during the American Revolution, the French Revolution, you name it, there were spies on either side. During World War I, World War II, there were spies. There were spy networks.
Right.
Our CIA had spies. The British had spies in the MI5.
And also the Russians had spies in this country too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was a big deal. So what we had to do is set up surveillance techniques to identify who the spies were. And how did we do that? Well, it was very difficult. Today it's a lot easier because once we get a photograph of a spy, that facial recognition software that is worldwide now with Interpol and with the cooperation of the Japanese and German governments, everybody around the world cooperates in the sharing of information.
But here's the question.
They can identify that person.
Okay, so we all know that, but here's the question, which is the larger question, is are you willing to trade in your privacy for protection against terrorism?
No. And I think here's the way I would answer the question. What do I feel the government should do? I think once they have reasonable suspicion, and I think that's a good term, that a particular individual is suspicious, is a suspect, they have some basis for showing he's a suspect in a particular crime or in a particular conspiracy that may have already happened or may be about to happen, then they have a right to go to this massive database that they've acquired and run a search for that particular individual through that database.
But it's the acquiring of the phone logs and the emails that they're storing and just capturing from everybody. That's the issue here. Should they be allowed to throw this net over everybody without even knowing whether or not they're guilty?
Well, let me tell you where we're going. I think not only do they have a right, they have an obligation to do it. They have an obligation as our government, as our protector from terroristic threats, from 9/11, from you name it, from the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor. If we have any way of identifying that threat beforehand that does not invade the individual privacy of an individual, then we have an obligation to gather that information and have it available subject to disclosure by judicial order.
But they have invaded the privacy of individuals when they have your emails and your phone logs. That's invading your privacy.
And I think here's the gap, and I agree with you 100%, and I wonder if you agree with me on this. It's okay to collect the raw data, put it in a private file that's secret, that no one can access without a judge's order, and only if that judge has shown reasonable suspicion or probable cause to release that information for a particular individual or group of individuals.
But one thing, we're going to move on because we have to take a break and take some more phone calls. So one thing you don't object to is collecting all the data in the first place. That doesn't bother you.
I would object if they were not. If the information is available,
okay.
I would object if they weren't. I think our country is entitled, our citizens are entitled to have a database available that, through judicial order, will allow someone to inquire with proof of reasonable suspicion to allow them to divulge that particular data.
Okay. All right. Thanks. We're going to have to take a break. Thanks for calling. Let's take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll go straight to the rest of the calls online. If you're online, keep holding on. We'll go to your calls after the break. Okay, this is Mike Fader again, Sirius XM Left 127, and we have Michael on the line. Go ahead, you're on. You there?
Hello?
Yeah, you're on the line.
Mike?
Yeah, you're on.
Hi, it's Mitchell in New Jersey.
Mitchell. Hey, I was looking for you. I wanted you to call because I'm going to do some shows on Bradley Manning, and I need you to get in touch with me by email so I can work it out with you, all right?
I will do that.
Yeah, make sure you do. Yeah, go ahead.
Good to talk to you. There's a lot of things to say on this issue. First thing, one thing that I wanted to point out with that Judge Vinson, who you introduced, is making the ruling that was put forth by the Guardian, is the hypocrisy in his ruling, and that, in his prior major ruling, which was knocking down Obamacare, he did so because he objected to the government overreaching, and now he's making this particular ruling.
That's true. That's true.
In support of this. And this is a very difficult argument. On one hand, there's a slippery slope argument where if the government loses control of themselves and doesn't handle themselves in a forthright and handle this information in a forthright way and goes down that slippery slope, the effects of this kind of intelligence gathering can be absolutely chilling. On the other hand, probably most of this is rather innocuous information and information that's probably never going to be seen or utilized by the intelligence forces. And
of course, that's not really the point, is it, though? That it's innocuous. Well, if 99% of it's innocuous, so what? They still don't have the right to do it.
Okay. Now, a couple of things. Now, the Constitution grants us the right to privacy. But then again, even Thomas Jefferson, what's his famous quote about, a Constitution and our laws were meant to change, and it would be, the comparison was, it would be similar to expecting an adult male to wear the same clothing that he wore when he was a boy, if our laws did change in step with that. You said that you might support this if the intelligence, gathered, if you knew about the potential risks involved. But I guess I would ask you, how would they be able to tell you what those risks were without compromising the possible intelligence and security of the country by doing so?
Well, they just recently listed, I think it was 9 incidents, and they went into some little detail about how they prevented this guy from crossing the bridge and blowing up half of New York. They prevented that guy from doing this. And why haven't I heard this before? Why don't they tell me what they're doing? That when they told me what they did, that they actually said first of all, you have to believe them. That's another story. But let's say you believe them, that they prevented this terrorist, they prevented that terrorist, and they prevented this one, and they tell you where it was, and they tell you that they did it. They don't tell you how they did it. They just tell you that they did it. How is that hurting the United States to tell you anything like that? And they never did it before. They were forced to do it.
I'm speculating on this, and I don't know the answer to this. I'm guessing that they might say that there are terrorist networks and organizations of people, and that by informing the public of their successes in stopping that alleged attack, that they might be compromising future intelligence that they would be able to gather if those organizations were not aware of their capacity to get that information, which is probably why they're freaking out about the leak that got to The Guardian. Again, that's just speculation, but I think that might be a plausible thing that they would say.
Well, let me give you one more point to make, and then I should go on to another call. But don't forget to get in touch with me by email about Bradley Manning.
I will.
Did you have anything else you wanted to say, or?
No.
Okay.
I find it. I mean, I can. With Bradley Manning, I was relating in the past something about my son had said, but one thing that he told me was that, and he has a top security clearance, he's a diplomat in the State Department, and he said that, as part of their training, towards the end of their training, they're brought into a room, they're told to remove all their, all their phones, any paper, pens, or anything like that, and they're given a security briefing on some of the risks that are going on there. He wouldn't discuss it with me, and he was extremely liberal before joining the State Department. He was out protesting the Iraqi war almost every day and involved in activities like that. But when he was briefed, he said it was a very chilling experience. I don't know what the information is. It's very hard, and I think but I do think that the safeguards have got to be looked at and examined and approved and outed, for the American public.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. And also, we're going to move on to another call, but I mean, the fact that Chief Justice of the Supreme Court appoints these judges by himself with no oversight and nobody else paying attention to it is plain wrong. What do we have next? All right, go ahead. You're on the air. Chuck, is it? Yeah, Chuck, you're on the air.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, you're on the air.
Oh, sorry about that. How you doing? I agree with a lot of points you said, and my phone had cut off, and I didn't hear the ending part when you mentioned Hoover. That was one of my points I was going to bring up. Mm-hmm. And I've been in the computers for a long time. Anybody who's naive not to know that this was happening, I don't know how. Even when Microsoft built it built this system on a flawed system with so many holes and securities that even the banks back then, if you was working as IT back then, they were stealing, but they didn't want the public to know. It was like the emperor wears no clothes or something like that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The only thing I like to just add to it is that the only thing that will make something like this change is that when politicians feel that threat. And what I mean by that is that, say like the Democrats think everything is all right now because they're doing it to the people. Once they find out this, like you got Blackwater, you got what's this guy Cheney and that secret group. Mm-hmm. What if they use that same technology to manipulate elections like Nixon did without anybody knowing by spying on other politicians and stuff like that? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, that's what Hoover did. One of the reasons Hoover had so much power is that he tapped the phones and bugged conversations of politicians, and he blackmailed them, and that's why he had so much power.
Right, and that's what the politicians should be. See, the politicians have more to be scared of than the people, because the people, like, the politicians have the power, right? I'm thinking of like Hitler and stuff like that, how he took over basically the government and stuff like that. And a real evil entity, whatever you want to call it, whatever, like a movie, whatever is going on, like a Blackwater and stuff like that, can really take over the government. So that's what they should be scared of. This is like the drones, the genies out of a bottle. So it should be open. The more open they are, I think, which is not going to happen. And my whole thing with this, yeah.
Yeah. No, we do have to move on. Take one more call. I don't know. I think they're going to resist being open, but I think if people don't demand that they are open, we've finally cashed in and lost the entire democracy we have. Let's get one more call. Who is it? Jenna. Okay, Jenna, you're on.
Hi, Mike.
Hiya.
Great show. I think this is all fascinating. My question is, in this modern era of information technology, we can't really ask the government to operate with less than what is the state-of-the-art new thing, because whoever out there, the evildoers, whatever you have, they all have this technology and they're working to get it even as strongly as our government is. Mm-hmm. And my thought is, because I've been thinking about this a lot lately, you can't go back to the horse and buggy days of information and having our government operate that way. So it seems like one of your earlier guests, maybe it was Mitchell, that was saying maybe it's the access to that data. And you mentioned it too. The access to that data might be better regulated, but I don't think having the whole thing, just saying, okay, well, they can't do it, is going to solve anything. It's just going to make it harder if the evildoers, or whatever you want to call them, mm-hmm. other countries, if they're collecting it at a stellar rate, and we decide we're not allowed to collect it. And then what happens when? Well, I need not go on.
Yeah, I guess.
I would want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I guess what I'm thinking about that is that obviously it's an important point that you're making, and if to have this technology and not use it would be, maybe it's putting the American public at risk. What it gets to the point finally, though, is you have to ask yourself is, when they keep violating all of our rights, like the First Amendment rights, the Fourth Amendment right, when we finally don't have any rights left, what is the point of this protection? What are they protecting? They're not protecting a democratic system anymore. They're protecting what? Who? Who are they protecting, and what are they protecting if in the course of doing what they say is protecting us, they destroy all the freedoms that we have in this country? In other words, to preserve our freedom, they have to take it away? This
goes back to another thought too. I'll try to be really quick. That I think it comes down to who we elect to represent us, and we need to, more than ever now, reform the entire election system so that we can trust those representing us and get rid of the the gerrymandering and rigging elections and all of that, because without trusting our public officials, we really can't turn the clock back on information technology. So what we really need to do is to be able to trust those in power that have access to this, that they are doing the right thing.
Well, and the only way to trust those people is if they aren't backed by rich people and corporations. That's what it comes down to. In other words, if they are elected by us and not by rich people, then we can trust them more.
Don't you think?
You know what? We're right. We're right at the end of. Okay,
I'm so sorry.
No, that's all right. It's all right. I just realized that we're at the end of the hour. So this is what happens. We have these interesting conversations. We run right up against the end of the hour. So, all right. So if you want to get in touch with me about this, 2 ways to do it. Go to my website, Federfiles, FEDERFILES.com, FEDERFILES.com. And you can get on my mailing list. I send out little essays and stuff on personal stuff, autobiographical stuff, essays, political stuff. And you can also contact me by going to the website. Also go to this political blog that I run called Occupied Territory on Facebook. So that's it for this week. Check out the website, check out the Occupied Territory, and of course we'll be back next week when we have on somebody who is one of the most famous freedom of speech lawyers that this country has ever had.